Chapter 174. The weather in the north was as complicated as the terrain. The warm sun from 2 days ago had disappeared and was replaced by dark clouds. After a whole day of preparation, the rain finally fell at noon the next day. At this time, the sixth encirclement of the Brand Kingdom was still ongoing. Compared to the previous 5 times, this encirclement was obviously better. Although there were no great results, at least they were chasing after the main force of the Greycoat army. It wasn't like the previous few times where they chased after scattered groups all over the mountains and plains, only to realize that they had disappeared as they chased after them. It would be best if they could only leave it as it was. In the open space between the mountains, the soldiers of the 3 armies were taking a short break. Ralph and the others were all experts in using soldiers. They knew how to take a break. Therefore, they did not let the soldiers chase after the Greycoat army day and night. They maintained a constant speed and followed behind the Greycoat army. Because they were only taking a break, other than the main tent, the other soldiers did not set up their tents. All the soldiers lowered their heads to avoid the rain. Some took the time to take a nap, and some took out their rations to eat. At this time, a shrill sound was heard. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Be alert! Splash! Water splashed everywhere. The soldiers on the ground quickly got up. The shield soldiers immediately formed a square formation. The light armored soldiers ran to the back to hide, and the archers began to gather. From this short moment of reaction, perhaps you could understand why the fierce and barbaric people of the northern wilderness had not succeeded in conquering the north of the Brand. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, a large number of arrows suddenly shot out from the dense forest beside the open space. Mixed with the rain, the arrows fell on the soldiers' heads. Bang, bang, bang. Most of the arrows were blocked by the shields. Of course, some of the soldiers were not able to react in time. Some of them were slightly slower and were directly nailed to the ground. The blood on the ground was instantly diluted by the rain. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. After the first round of arrow rain, there was a pause. The second and third rounds of arrow rain came in the blink of an eye. However, the effect of these 2 rounds of arrow rain was almost negligible. The soldiers of the 3 armies were all experienced on the battlefield. Any small gap would be taken advantage of by them. Motherf **, here they come again. Soldiers on the left and right, listen to my orders, attack, and surround them. Archers, listen to my orders. Head towards the northwest. Suppress them for me. A majestic man walked out of the tent and roared furiously. As soon as he finished speaking, the spearmen on the left and right flanks rushed out like a long dragon without hesitation. They quickly surrounded the forest. At the same time, a large number of arrows were shot back into the dense forest, and the sound of trees hitting leaves could be heard. However, at this time, the attacks in the dense forest had disappeared. After the rain of arrows from the soldiers entered, there were no screams or groans. Not long after, the attacking soldiers walked out of the dense forest. The captains and officers at the front all shrugged helplessly, indicating that there was no one inside. Seeing this, the big man's face darkened. Scout team, expand the search area. Also increase the security. After saying this, he angrily lifted the curtain and walked into the tent. The tent was quite large, and there were quite a few people gathered there. At this time, most of them were surrounding the map and discussing. In the east, there were 2 generals in high-grade armor. How is it, General Bela? A middle-aged general with a gloomy expression asked. Motherf **, what else could it be? They ran away. The big man sat down gloomily. He grabbed the water bottle on the table and took a big gulp. These Greycoat army. Sigh, we can't underestimate them. These 3 generals were naturally Ralph, Baylor, and Gary. The Greycoat army's numbers exceeded their expectations. This caused the 3 generals to gather together to pursue and attack. Although the number of people on both sides was about the same, there was no need to doubt the strength of the regular army. Therefore, Baylor and the others weren't worried that they couldn't win. The problem now was that they didn't even have a chance to fight. Ever since the Greycoat army broke through the encirclement of the Blue Flame army, they hadn't fought them head-on. Take note, it was head-on. The Greycoat army's daily sneak attacks and harassment didn't stop. Originally, when the army advanced, there would be scouts scouting ahead. Under normal circumstances, this would eliminate the possibility of a sneak attack. But where was this? This was the 100,000 Mountains. The various strange terrains made the scouts feel helpless even if they wanted to. For example, there was a steep mountain peak in front. Before the scouts could climb up, the troops behind had arrived. Then, a large number of arrows rained down from above. Another example was passing through a large forest. At this time, no matter how many scouts there were, it was inevitable that they would overlook something. Then, when the army passed by, of course, there would be another rain of arrows. Although this situation didn't cause much damage after they were deliberately on guard. However, if this continued, it would undoubtedly affect the morale of the soldiers. It wasn't that Baylor and the others hadn't thought of luring out these sneak attacks. However, the other party always used longbow soldiers and only released 3 rounds of arrow rain at most. Then, no matter how good the opportunity was, they would decisively retreat. If they didn't eat the bait, they naturally wouldn't be able to catch it. They had the elite soldiers of the 3 armies, but they couldn't do anything. Baylor and the others were rather depressed now. Just wait. Ralph sat at the side for a long time and finally said something. Although it was a little confusing, the other 2 could understand. Phew! Baylor let out a long breath. That's right. We'll let them be arrogant for 2 more days. When the feudal lord soldiers are in place, I'll show them what the brand's official army is like. The feudal lord's soldiers. I'm afraid they won't be useful. Gary seemed rather disdainful. There's no need for them to be useful, Baylor said carelessly. As long as they can reach the designated location in the stipulated time and block the path of the Greycoat army. TSK, TSK, TSK. Even if there are more than 20,000 pigs, it will take a while to kill them. There's enough time for us to arrive. Oomph. Gary snorted through his nose, but he didn't object to Baylor's words. When they first found out that the main force of the Greycoat army was in the valley, the 3 armies directly came to encircle and annihilate them. As for the soldiers of the 4 feudal lords, they were arranged to guard the periphery and do nothing. Who would have expected that in the end, the Greycoat army would forcefully break through from the west? The encirclement battle became a long-term pursuit battle. Baylor and the others then thought of the feudal lord soldiers. At that time, only feudal Lord Solomon's soldiers were guarding the west. They definitely wouldn't be able to stop them. The 3 generals discussed and simply let them continue to retreat. Then, they sent out scouts to inform the feudal lords in the other directions to continuously draw closer to Solomon. Actually, the 3 armies were now camping on time and eating on time. It seemed like they were chasing a steady pace, but in reality, it was also a kind of strategy. They were driving the Greycoat army's rhythm of escape. Currently, it seemed that this strategy was effective. The Greycoat army wasn't desperately hurrying on with their journey. Instead, they spent some effort on these continuous sneak attacks. This way, as long as the soldiers of the 3 feudal lords traveled a little more every day, they would eventually overtake the Greycoat army from the side and meet up with feudal Lord Solomon. As long as they blocked the path in front of the Greycoat army. Baylor was right. Even if there were more than 20,000 pigs blocking a path, it would still take a lot of effort to clear them out. At this moment, the curtains of the large tent were lifted and a messenger entered. General, this is an urgent letter from the military. The soldier was from the Thunderbolt's army, so he naturally passed the letter to Baylor. Yes. Baylor nodded slightly and casually opened it. Military? The supplies have been sent? When did those officials become so efficient? Bang! Crash! His voice stopped, and the table fell apart. Baylor's palm stopped in midair, and his face was pitch black. The large tent instantly fell silent. Only the sound of raindrops hitting the roof could be heard. Everyone shifted their gaze over. General Baylor? Gary asked suspiciously. Crack! He stretched out his hand and clenched it tightly. Then he retracted his hand, and his joints emitted explosive sounds. Baylor's chest rapidly panted a few times. Idiot! Idiot! More than half of the supplies have been burned on the way. What? Gary was shocked, and his eyes instantly widened. On the other side, Ralph, who was usually expressionless, was also astonished. The officers in the large tent were also shocked by this news. Then, they started to discuss it. In the end, the military did not dare to hide this news. In reality, this news could not be hidden. Otherwise, if the troops launched a general attack the next day, the supplies that had been sent today would not be enough to fill the stomachs of the soldiers. That would be a huge problem. How is that possible? After digesting this sentence, Gary instinctively shook his head. Isn't the supply team behind us? How could they have been burned bandits? That can't be. Do they have the guts? It says that it's the Gray Coat Army, Gary looked at Baylor, and his tone was a little strange. What did you say, the Gray Coat Army? Then what are we chasing after? At this moment, Ralph picked up the paper on the floor and frowned as he looked at it. It's a small unit from the Gray Coat Army. It seems like there are only a dozen of them. How King embarrassing. Speaking up to this point, Baylor stretched out his hand again, but there was no table to hit. A dozen of them burned more than half of the supplies. Gary's expression was so gloomy that it seemed like water could drip from it. He roared in a low voice, "This is a disgrace to soldiers. They should be hanged directly." That's strange. Ralph looked at the letter and raised his head. Where do they come from? Naturally, he was talking about the dozen of them who burned the supplies. This was indeed a question. If the Gray Coat Army had specially prepared a backup plan, they would not have sent such a small number of people. However, no matter how he thought about it, he would not have known that this was just a group of pitiful people who had been unjustly implicated. I don't care where they came from. Gary narrowed his eyes with a murderous look. I just want to know when they will die. It's raining, so they can't burn anything. The letter says that they have already sent an extermination team. They should be dead by now. After many years of fighting, Baylor had seen many storms and waves. At this moment, he finally suppressed his anger. Then, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. It's not a pity that this group of people died, but our plan side, their supplies could not keep up. Their original plan to catch up with the Gray Coat Army in these 2 days was naturally completely ruined. Someone ordered the scouts to immediately inform the Lord's soldiers and ask them to run forward for a while. As for the exact time of the attack, wait for us to inform them of the exact time. Baylor was also afraid of the group of idiots behind them. Before confirming the arrival of the supplies, he did not dare to set an exact time at all. Then, he thought about how he would have to endure a few more days of sneak attacks and harassment from the Gray Coat Army. Because of this, he could not help but raise his head and sigh. Although the opponents who are like lions and tigers are frightening, these pigs, teammates who are worse than pigs, are the real scourge. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 175. Whoosh, bang. A blue light shot up from the mountain and exploded when it reached a certain height. The falling raindrops were also blasted apart by the force of the impact. They were imprinted with a blue light, as if a piece of glass had been shattered. Soon, groups of people appeared and gathered at the foot of the steep mountain. Who released the signal flare? A low-ranking officer in chainmail ran over with a group of people and asked, I saw them go up the mountain. The soldier pointed at the towering peak in front of him. Ha, good. They're digging their own graves. The low-ranking officer glanced around and saw that no one was higher than him. He ordered, You, and you lead the team up with me. The rest of the people will surround the mountain. If there are more people coming from behind, let them guard the bottom. Yes, let's go. After that, the low-ranking officer led more than 200 people to the mountain and spread out slightly to search the top of the mountain. Do you think they can kill that group of people? A soldier who stayed behind asked. There are so many people, it shouldn't be a problem. It's hard to say. A soldier shook his head, his face a little ugly. You don't know how powerful they are. It's been 2 days. These people are like ghosts, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. More than a dozen teams have already been destroyed by them. I saw with my own eyes a person with a red dagger destroy half a team in an instant and then break out of the encirclement. That scene, I don't dare to imagine. I don't dare to imagine. Hiss, so powerful. The soldier took a deep breath and then sighed. No wonder they can burn more than half of the supplies in one night. You know, more than a dozen captains have already been sent to the military court. Because of them, TSK, TSK. They probably won't be able to escape from the gallows. I know, I heard about it too. And this time, the armaments department is also anxious. It's said that whoever kills this group of people will be directly promoted to deputy commander. Otherwise, the officer just now was so agitated. Is it easy to get this military merit? It's gambling with our lives. We'd better be honest soldiers. At least if something happens, the responsibility won't fall on us. Yes, that makes sense. Okay, let's stop talking. They're now on the mountain and have nowhere to go. As long as we guard the mountain pass, they'll still die in the end. Yes, this mountain peak was much higher than the surrounding mountain ranges, but the area was not large. The 200 or so soldiers who entered the mountains spread out to search, forming 2 layers of encirclement. Search the trees and bushes carefully. Don't miss any corner. Don't attack blindly. The low-ranking officer drew his saber and shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, screams and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard from the side. It seemed a little chaotic. Enemy attack. Don't panic, guard your positions. While shouting, the low-ranking officer led his men to the scene of the incident. However, by the time he arrived, the battle had already ended. 3 soldiers lay motionless on the ground, while the other 7 or 8 people retreated to the side in panic. Where's he? They ran away. He suddenly jumped down from the tree and attacked. These 3 brothers are dead meat. Yes, the low-ranking officer nodded. Instead of being shocked, he was delighted. Sure enough, on this mountain peak, a corner dog would jump over the wall. Were they going all out? Enemy attack. Suddenly, a similar warning came from the other side. Continue searching. After saying this, the low-ranking officer led his men and rushed over again. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. As the search continued, many teams were attacked to varying degrees. Their methods were similar. They left after one attack, leaving a few corpses behind. I like to see how long you can struggle. The low-ranking officer did not suggest any changes to the current formation. He just kept urging the soldiers to move forward. Obviously, he wanted to use the advantage of numbers. He wanted to crush the opponent directly. The mountain peak was wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. As the search area gradually shrank, the distance between the soldiers also became smaller. Layer by layer, they formed a circle and kept climbing up. Bang! Enemy! The withered branches and rotten leaves under the feet of a group of soldiers suddenly exploded. A figure rushed up, and then a red thread pulled up, instantly knocking down 4 soldiers around it. Kill! The attack this time was right next to the low-ranking officer. He drew his saber without hesitation, swung it in the rain, and viciously slashed at the back of the figure. Ding! With a crisp sound of metal clashing, the saber was directly hit, and then a drop of blood fell toward the officer's throat. The officer was shocked, but his reaction was not slow. He quickly retreated and flipped backward. When the officer retreated to a safe distance, he saw that the 7 or 8 soldiers from before had been slaughtered. Looking at the surrounding soldiers flocking over, the black figure made a throat-slitting gesture at the officer, and then quickly retreated, disappearing into the rain. Continue chasing. The officer gritted his teeth and said he did not believe that the other party had any tricks up his sleeve. It was just a dying struggle, but after saying that, he still took out a signal flare and threw it into the sky. The mountain peak here was high, so more people would see it. Bang! The blue light emitted a hazy light in the rain. After the signal flare was released, the search suddenly became much smoother. The sneaky figures did not appear anymore. At this time, more and more people gathered at the foot of the mountain. It seemed that all the surrounding soldiers had come here. Some people listened to the low-ranking officer and stood guard at the foot of the mountain. However, there were also people of the same rank as the officer who quickly rushed up. Obviously, they were also here for military merits. A quarter of an hour later. Quick! Seeing the top of the mountain in sight, the low-ranking officer shouted excitedly. Compared to the steep mountain, the top of the mountain was quite flat. There was a huge rock in the middle, and on one side, there was a crooked, towering ancient tree. Whoosh! The soldiers rushed in like a tide, but then their footsteps were a little hesitant, because the death-like figure on the road was sitting on the huge rock at this time, quietly looking at them. Ha! There's no way to escape. The low-ranking officer walked out of the crowd. At this time, he saw the other party's appearance. The ordinary face had no sense of existence. The only feature was the long and narrow eyes. You're so slow. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Well, I like your slowness. The figure, Tangan shrugged and said casually, waiting for us. Ha, want to surrender? The officer laughed twice and raised his head, but unfortunately, we only need your body. The surrounding people have almost gathered. As if he did not hear the officer's words, Tang In said thoughtfully, "Oh, what did you say? Is he crazy?" The officer frowned, and then his heart moved. He glanced at the top of the mountain. Where are your companions? Aren't there more than a dozen people? They jumped off the cliff. Tang In stood up and bowed. Finally, thank you for the signal flare. Your mission is completed. You can die. Whoosh! As if crossing space, the figure directly came in front of the officer through the curtain of rain, followed by a red light pointed at the officer's forehead. Roar! The officer, who had been wary of Tang In, roared and raised his saber. Chi! The saber slid past the figure and cut it in half. Not good. The officer was not happy at all because the saber did not feel any physical contact. A thought flashed through his mind, and his body suddenly retreated. You're too slow. With a sigh, the officer only felt a light in his eyes, and a dark metal blade suddenly appeared in front of him. It was said that when facing death, people's senses would be particularly sharp. The officer only felt that the rain suddenly became very slow, so slow that he could see each vertebral-shaped water droplet clearly. Then he vaguely smelled a trace of blood on the blade, getting closer and closer, closer and closer. Puff! The dagger went straight between his eyebrows. The soldiers around him were dumbfounded. His figure quickly turned around, stepped on a huge rock, and leaped onto an ancient tree. Then, he jumped without hesitation, jumped off the cliff. The soldiers' brains were short-circuited by the events that happened in a few moments. What's that? A soldier who saw it suddenly asked. Following the direction of the finger, the soldiers saw the figure quickly glide in the air to another mountain peak. Although the downward trend was obvious, this was obviously not the route that a cliff jump should take. Quickly rushing to the edge of the cliff, the crowd realized that there was a green vine on the ancient tree that connected to the mountain peak below, but because of the obstruction of the tree and the curtain of rain, no one noticed. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the black figure became a small black dot and smoothly glided to the opposite mountain peak, jumped down, and seemed very relaxed. It seemed to be waving its hand in this direction. If you like this work, you are welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 176. Let's go. Tang and cut the vines with his saber and turn around. The dozen or so members of the gray space beside him were a little dazed. It was always exciting to watch someone else do it. But when it was their turn, their legs turned to jelly. The rain gradually became heavier, and almost all the soldiers in the surroundings were lured to the steep mountain peak. In other words, Tang In and the others would be safe for at least the next hour. This chase had been going on for 2 days, and more soldiers were chasing after them. What was worse was that Tang In and the others' intention to go west had been guessed. Actually, it wasn't really guessed. After all, anyone who looked at the overall situation knew that there was only a slim chance of survival in the west. But guessing was one thing, and being able to block it was another. Tang In and the others had been running around aimlessly like ghosts for the past 2 days. They even went in the opposite direction a few times, messing up the formation of the soldiers who were chasing them. Of course, as time went by, the soldiers' advantage in numbers was gradually brought into play. They even caught up with them a few times, but they escaped in all kinds of strange ways every time. "Boss, where are we going now?" David asked as he carried Luke on his back. The battle had been intense in the past 2 days. Although the Gray Space team hadn't lost any members, they had been injured. Luke, who wasn't good at close combat, was the most seriously injured. A saber had almost pierced through his abdomen. If they hadn't happened to find herbs that could stop the bleeding, they would have been listening to the gospel of the God of Light. "Northwest," Tang Yin said firmly without looking back. "Okay." Everyone nodded without the slightest doubt. In the past few days, they had thought that they were going to die for sure several times, but Tang Yin had always brought them out of danger in all kinds of ways. If they had obeyed Tang Yin because of his strength before, they were now blindly worshipping him. Tang Yin and the others didn't have a map and didn't know what was going on ahead, so they walked very casually. After walking northwest for about half an hour, they found a checkpoint that they had to pass. The checkpoint was no longer guarded by only 20 people like a few days ago. Now, each checkpoint was guarded by a platoon of nearly 100 people. Therefore, Tang Yin and the others changed their route again and headed north towards the dense forest. Compared to the steep mountainous terrain, the dense forest with piles of rotten leaves was more difficult to traverse and more dangerous. Not long after they entered the forest, Misho's feet suddenly sank into the ground. Bang! Misho's reaction was very fast. His body spun up, bringing up the scattered mud. "It's the swamp. Go around. I'll walk in front." Tang Yin did not choose to leave the forest. Such an environment was perfect for blocking a large number of pursuers. The forest was very humid, and now that it was raining, one could smell the rotten smell of moss and rottenwood everywhere. With such a terrain, swamps and the like were naturally common. No one dared to belittle nature's natural hazards. Tang Yin walked in front to clear the way. From time to time, he would activate his peeping glass, and his pupils would turn into almond-shaped shapes to scout the surrounding environment. "Boss!" David suddenly exclaimed. Tang," and turned his head. The blade in his right hand flashed, and a lightning-fast red snake on the tree behind him was cut in half. "I'm fine now. Pack this up. We'll have snake meat for lunch." Rotten swamps, poisonous snakes, spotted spiders. The dense forest showed the intruders all kinds of local specialties and all kinds of indigenous people. Tang Yin had received special training in the forest, so he walked naturally and smoothly. In the eyes of the people behind him, it was as if the branches were consciously avoiding him and did not obstruct him at all. Crack! Misho stepped on a tree branch that was growing horizontally. He staggered and immediately steadied himself. "Misho, why are you walking so strangely like a girl?" David asked in surprise. Misho rolled his eyes. "It's none of your business." Tang Yin, who was walking in front, curled his lips slightly and smiled. Of course, he knew why Misho was like this. It could be said that as long as there were no accidents, Misho would be the most successful member of the Gray Space. Misho noticed that the reason why Twain was able to move so smoothly was because of his footsteps. Tang Yin's footsteps were light and silent. When one foot was about to touch the ground, the other foot would quickly rise, and he seemed to be floating in the air. Of course, this was an illusion. Tang Yin was far from being able to float in the air. The reason for this was all due to his technique. Misho was trying to imitate Luke's movements, so he stumbled a lot. "Huh? Ha-ha, pheasant." David laughed wildly as he carried Luke on his back and rushed to the right. There was a pheasant with red feathers resting on top of a broken tree root. Probably because of the rain and the cold, the pheasant curled up and didn't move. "This foodie," Tang Yin shook his head. Then he looked at the black soil and shouted anxiously, "David, don't move." "Oh, what's wrong?" David had already rushed to the tree root. He held Luke with one hand and quickly pinched the pheasant with the other. As soon as he said that, David's body suddenly sank, and a series of bubbles appeared on the black soil. Obviously, it was a huge swamp. "Damn it!" Tang Yin turned around and shouted, "Quick, pull the vines." The swamp was too big. Tang Yin could go through it for a short time, but it was impossible for him to pull David and Luke out. After all, they were both heavy. "Boss, catch!" David shouted and raised his arms. Luke flew to the edge of the swamp. F***CK. Don't move. Because of their weight, the swamp was already up to David's knees. Now, because of his strength, the black soil reached his abdomen. David realized that he had done something stupid and hurriedly stopped moving, but the swamp slowly swallowed him up. Boss! Luke, who was caught, was pale. He pointed to the front and said, I think there was a movement just now. Huh? Tangan was stunned. He looked over and saw that it was a floating field of rotten leaves. There didn't seem to be any movement. Frowning, his pupils instantly became almond-shaped, and he activated his peeping skill again. The lines of leaves, the lines of short wood, and the vague lines of four-legged reptiles. They were hidden under the swamp and slowly slithered toward David. In this kind of environment, it was obvious that they weren't anything good. F***CK. Tang handed Luke to Michaud and rushed out like an arrow. Whoosh! At this time, a creature that arrived first suddenly jumped out. It was more than 10 feet long and had a black body. It opened its mouth wide and directly wanted to swallow David's head. What is it? David was shocked and reflexively punched. Don't move. Bang! Tang, who had rushed over, stepped on the creature's head and directly stomped it into the swamp. Then, he opened his arms and took advantage of the momentum to rise. Whoosh! 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 Several black shadows pounced on David from different directions. Empty kill. Twain's figure appeared in midair, and suddenly 5 or 6 indistinguishable figures attacked in an instant. Hiss! 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 More than 10 red lines crisscrossed around David, and the unknown creatures that pounced on him were directly cut into several pieces and thrown to the ground, their stinky blood sprinkling down. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Like poking a beehive, the surrounding black swamp suddenly tumbled like boiling water. In Tangan's eyes, those were clearly creatures that slid over rapidly, and the scattered pieces of meat were also devoured by the creatures that arrived first. But this was far from enough, so more creatures rushed toward Tang, and David. Whoosh! 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 Black shadows jumped out one after another and pounced on them from all directions. Good timing. Tangan's figure flashed wildly, and in an instant, he circled around David a few times. There were afterimages everywhere, and it was as if more than 10 people had suddenly appeared. Then, dense red lines were pulled out one after another. The intelligence of these creatures was average, and they bit down when they saw the afterimages. Chi! 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 Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain, and pieces of flesh of different sizes fell layer by layer. The black swamp around them suddenly turned into a river of blood, and the stench was nauseating. Whoosh! 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 The creatures around them went crazy. Some were busy devouring the corpses of their own kind, and more pounced on the red lines that were like a barrier. Boss, the vines are done. Harry, who was holding a large bundle of vines by the swamp, shouted because he could not see Tangan's figure. Throw it over. Flowers. Although it was not loud, it was very clear. In an instant, the red lines around them seemed to be swallowed by a black hole, and they gathered into something that looked like a nut core. Then, petals of different lengths of blood spread out, and enchanting flowers of blood gradually bloomed. Die! A blurry figure appeared and pushed out both arms. The flowers of blood shattered into a blade of light and radiated in all directions. Whoosh! 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 Bang! 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 The creatures that pounced in the air exploded one after another. Pieces of flesh flew everywhere, and a mist of blood filled the air. The surroundings were cleared in an instant. Hurry up and throw it! Oh! Harry, who was shocked by the bloody scene, came back to his senses and threw the end of the vines over with great force. Tang reacted quickly and caught it. At this moment, whoosh, there was a loud tumbling sound. Tang turned around and his eyes widened. A four-legged creature with a body like a small mountain was swimming over from the swamp in the distance. Those of the same kind who were fighting for the pieces of flesh could not avoid it, and were directly crushed by it. F***CK, I hit the small one, and the big one came out. Tang, and hurriedly threw the vines to David. Hurry up and pull it. Bang! 10 people over there pulled together, and David was pulled out in an instant like a carrot. Whoosh! In the whistling sound, a black shadow covered the sky. The mountain-like creature had arrived. Perhaps because its body was too big to jump, it opened its bloody mouth and bit Tang and who was in front of it. Tang did not know how sharp the creature's teeth were, but the force of its bite was definitely not something he could withstand. He quickly leaped up, avoided the stinking big mouth, and landed on the creature's head. Then, he grabbed the dagger and stabbed it down. Ding! F***CK. Tang looked at his arm that had been shaken off and was shocked. This was the meteorite iron essence that was known to be able to cut gold and jade. Boss, be careful. This is a swamp snake lizard. After David was pulled ashore, a voice sounded. Swamp snake lizard? What was that? Whoosh. Before Tang could figure it out, there was a strong wind behind his head. He subconsciously rolled to the side. Boom! A thick and long tail hit the place where he was just now. Hiss! The giant beast called the swamp snake lizard let out a sorrowful cry. Its huge head was knocked forward by its own tail. F***CK. Tang could not help but curse. Fortunately, he dodged quickly. Otherwise, he would not have been able to survive after being hit. The swamp snake lizard was in pain and seemed a little crazy. Its body suddenly turned sharply, tried to shake off Tang in. If there was no threat, Tang would not be afraid to walk on the swamp. But now that there was this giant beast, he did not dare to fall. So he ran wildly in the direction of the swamp snake lizard's rotation and stayed on top of it. Although the swamp snake lizard's body was much bigger, it obviously did not have any improvement in intelligence. Seeing that Tang was still on it, it seemed to have forgotten the pain from last time and swung its tail again. Tang did not hesitate to roll to the side. Boom! The swamp snake lizard hissed again. This is Tang, who had rolled and stood up, saw a lantern-like thing suddenly appear not far away from him. Slender brown beads were moving inside. Is this an eye? Tang felt a chill in his heart. Did this thing grow up on hormones? How could it be so big? Since he had encountered it, Tang would not be soft-hearted. He rushed forward and stabbed the blood ray dagger into the center of the lantern-like eye. F***CK. I don't believe that your eye can withstand a meteorite iron essence puff. Hiss! A deafening roar. The result was not out of Tang's expectations. The dagger smoothly pierced into the center of the eye, and a large amount of red blood emerged. The swamp lizard went crazy. Its huge body miraculously bounced up and then fell into the swamp with a bang, crushing a group of small swamp lizards and splashing mud everywhere. Tang was thrown out by the huge force of the swamp lizard and fell forward. Fortunately, it was the direction closest to the shore, so Tang adjusted his body in the air and landed lightly on the swamp. Without waiting for his shoes to get wet, Tang quickly slid forward and rushed forward on the quagmire, as if he was skating on ice. Boss, be careful. Tang turned his head and saw that the giant swamp lizard opened its bloody mouth and spat out a black cylindrical gas. The small swamp lizards along the way melted quickly in this gas, and not even their bones were left. They directly turned into nothingness. F***CK. Tang's scalp tingled when he saw this. He quickly activated it. His originally swift figure suddenly turned into lightning and leaped to the edge of the swamp in a few breaths. Go, go! Amidst the shouts, a large group of people rushed through the dense forest in a sorry state. After chasing for 100 meters, the black pillar of gas finally fell apart, leaving behind a straight path that had been corroded into mud. Huff! I'm not running anymore. The swamp lizard. It won't come ashore. After sprinting for a few hundred meters, David leaned against a tree and gasped for breath. F***CK. Tang swallowed. You bastard, you didn't even look at the situation when you caught a pheasant. I just wanted to eat beggar's chicken again. David looked very wronged and raised the trembling pheasant in his hand. Everyone was speechless. They had been sprinting all the way, and no one had noticed that the pheasant was still in David's hand. After a while, he roared, "Whoever makes beggar's chicken again is a *king coward." If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 177. After the short and exciting trip to the swamp, Tang In and the others became more careful. In fact, the forest was not big, but who would have thought that there was such a fierce beast hidden in it? When it was noon, they set up wooden boards to block the rain and started a fire to eat a delicious roasted snake. David was unwilling to give up. He dug mud and wrapped the pheasant in it, wanting to eat the beggar's chicken again. However, because he didn't control the fire well, he found that the pheasant inside was completely burnt. In the end, he had no choice but to give it up. "How do you feel now?" Tang and handed a skewer of snake meat to Luke. "Thank you, boss. It's okay. I won't die." Luke took the snake meat with a pale face and took a big bite. "Well, hold on a little longer. When we break out of the encirclement, you'll be fine." Tang and patted him on the shoulder. It would be a lie to say that he was fine. Luke's wound had only stopped bleeding, but it didn't get better. Now that it was raining heavily, the wound could easily be infected. However, Tang couldn't do anything during the escape. Now, he could only hope to break out of the encirclement as soon as possible and then recuperate for a while. Soon they set off again. After that, there were no more accidents. After 2 hours, the trees gradually thinned out. It was obvious that they were about to leave the forest. At that moment, Tang In suddenly frowned. Then, he flashed and rushed to the edge of the forest. Boss, what's wrong?" After catching up, David opened his mouth and looked shocked. Then, the others followed and looked at the scene in front of them in silence. What appeared in front of Tang In and the others was a grassland. Under the misty rain, they couldn't see the end of the grassland in other directions. There was no doubt that such an unobstructed terrain was a disaster for them who were fleeing for their lives. "Boss, let's go back and change direction," David suggested. Tang In shook his head. "No, the peak could only delay them for 2 hours at most. But we've been walking in the forest for more than 4 hours. There's a high chance that we'll run into them when we go back. Then we keep moving forward." Tang In narrowed his eyes and exhaled. "Hiding is not a solution. We don't have a map, so this kind of thing will happen sooner or later." Having made up their minds, no one dared to waste any more time. He quickly stepped into the withered grassland and ran forward. The current situation was very obvious. If Tang In and the others could get out of sight before they were discovered, then everything would be fine. If they were discovered on the way, when the signal flare was fired, the surrounding soldiers would probably come from all directions of the grassland, and Tang In and the others would directly run into the encirclement while walking blindly. The current situation was already advantageous for Tang In and the others. In such a heavy rain, a person's vision range would definitely be reduced. As long as Tang In and the others could run for 10 miles, they would be able to escape. Basically, they would disappear from the sight of their pursuers. The team moved forward in silence. From time to time, there would be people looking back. It could be said that this was a race against fate. 3 miles, 5 miles, 8 miles, bang. A thunderous sound rang out in the distance. Everyone paused, as if the loud sound had exploded in their hearts. Right now, they really hoped that it was just thunder. But after being on the run for a few days, they could naturally tell that it was the sound of a signal flare exploding. Looking back, a brilliant blue light bloomed in the sky above the dense forest. Yes, it was so bright that it was a little dazzling. "Phew!" Tang In exhaled deeply and said decisively, "Quick, keep moving forward. David, let me carry Luke." Since they had been discovered, there was no better way. They could only bravely move forward and gamble on their luck to see if there would be soldiers ahead. Everyone ran wildly across the grassland, panting heavily. Every time they opened their mouths, they would gulp down a mouthful of rainwater. Tang In looked back and saw thousands of densely packed black dots surging out from the dense forest. At this moment, they were chasing after them all over the mountains and plains. After running at high speed for 2 hours, Luke, who was lying on his back, suddenly said, "There are people ahead." "How many?" "I can't see clearly." "Many. Turn right." After a quick and short conversation, Tang didn't hesitate at all and directly led everyone to the right. As for why right, well, the first reaction of people who weren't left-handed was usually to the right. Luke's eyesight, which was better than ordinary people's, played a huge role in this situation. Although they would still be discovered after walking for a while, at least they had the upper hand and wouldn't run into them. About 5 minutes later, Tang and the others saw the group of people. The other party was a squadron of about 100 people. At that moment, the two sides were about 5 kilometers apart. The group of people had clearly seen Tang and the others, and were now changing their direction and chasing after them. Tang and the others were walking in a straight line, so if the group of people wanted to block them, they would have to move faster and cover a longer distance. Of course, this was if Tang and the others could smoothly walk in a straight line. "There are people on the right." "Many." Luke, who was looking around, suddenly said, "Move left. Follow me." Tangen's expression didn't change at all as he quickly said. In an instant, the originally straight line turned 45 degrees to the left, which was slightly closer to the squadron of soldiers they had just encountered. At that moment, the advantage of moving first was obvious. Even if Tang and the others were moving at the same speed as the soldiers, the 5 or 6 minutes lead was enough to prevent them from being directly surrounded. However, Tang and the others' advantage quickly vanished into thin air. "On the right, there are a lot of people," Luke said with difficulty. At that moment, he suddenly hated himself for having better eyesight than the others. "Move left again." Tangen's tone was as calm as ever as he led the dozen or so people in a different direction. At that moment, the advantage lay with the soldiers. If Tang and the others weren't faster than the other party, they would be surrounded from both sides. "Boss," David, who was running, suddenly called out. Tang turned around. "Take Luke and Michaud and leave. If we weren't holding you back, you would definitely be able to break through with your speed." David spat out a mouthful of rainwater. This was the truth. If Tang used his absolute speed, even with Luke on his back, he would still be able to leave the soldiers in the dust. Michaud's speed wasn't as exaggerated, but if he used his full strength, he would still be able to break through. "Yes, boss, you guys should go." "Boss, don't worry about us. Let's go." Everyone was shouting the same thing. They were all trying to persuade Tang and the others to leave on their own. "Shut the F*CK up. F*CK. I'm so touched. So, you guys are F*King heroes. I'm a F*King deserter. Listen up. I'm your F*King captain. Since I F*King brought you guys out, I'll F*King bring you back. If anyone dares to stop now, I'll be the first to kill him. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 178. If anyone dares to stop now, I'll be the first to kill him. Tangen's eyes glinted coldly as he mocked them. "Instead of letting your so-called heroes die, I might as well spend some effort and send you cowards on your way." Everyone couldn't help but lower their heads when they saw how furious Tang was. "Remember this forever. If you want to die, get the hell away from me. Don't let me see you die. Now, start running. Do you hear me?" "Yes. Louder. You're not dead yet." Tang roared. I heard it. In the torrential rain, everyone opened their mouths wide and let out guttural roars. "Very good." As they ran, bean-sized raindrops pelted their faces like hailstones. In such an environment, it was basically impossible to keep one's eyes open. The slightest distraction could result in them going astray. If it were any other time, it wouldn't matter if they went astray. At worst, they could just run a little longer and come back. However, it was a critical moment where every second mattered. If they took a wrong turn, they would be surrounded and the entire team would be wiped out. As far as Luke could see, all 3 teams were running toward the same location. Tang roughly estimated that the location was about 5 to 6 miles away from them, and might be closer to the pursuers. What they needed to do now was to increase their speed and rush out before the two teams of soldiers closed the door. Throw away your plate armor and run at full speed. Yes, sir. Everyone quickly responded. As they ran, they took off their breastplates, gauntlets, and greaves. Now that they were lighter, their speed increased a little more. This time, their run was smoother. They didn't see any other teams ahead of them. On the other side, however, soldiers flashed through the rain every now and then. 5 kilometers for kilometers, 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, both sides appeared clearly in each other's line of sight. Those with good eyesight could even see what the person in front of them looked like. 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters as they got closer, Tang and could even hear the heavy breathing of the soldiers on both sides. Stop. Who? Stop, and we'll spare your lives. If you keep running, we'll shoot arrows. Kill them. Some were threatening the enemy fiercely. Some were pretending to lure the enemy. All kinds of voices came from both sides. This was a psychological battle. After Tang, In, and the others abandoned their equipment, they finally caught up. Now, the three teams were almost the same distance away from the location. Under such circumstances, if he couldn't withstand the pressure, or if he hesitated, it was very likely that the situation would change. This kind of voice naturally had no effect on Tang Un, whose hands were stained with blood and who had a firm will. The team members behind him saw that Tang and didn't seem to care about him at all. They just kept running forward without a care. 100 meters, *T. Tang and narrowed his eyes and stared at the middle of the two groups of soldiers. Changing directions midway still affected their chances of escaping. If they just ran like this, the few people in front would be able to break through, but if they fell behind, the slower members would be entangled. Tang In shouted decisively, "David, boss." David's stamina was pretty good, so he kept following behind him. "Catch Luke and lead everyone out of here." After that, before David could react, Luke was gently tossed over to him. David subconsciously caught Luke, and his face changed. "Boss, shut your crow's beak. I won't die." Twain shouted to shut David's mouth. The latter sentence was an explanation. After saying that, Tang In paused in his footsteps and instantly fell to the back of the group. The one running at the back was Harry. This little fatty, with a lot of fat on his body, was running so hard that he was out of breath. It really made people worry that he would pass out in the next second. 50 meters, few. You can't run, few. As the distance closed, the soldiers on both sides estimated that they could block at least half of the members of the gray space. 30 meters, is that so? Tang In flicked his wrist and took out a dagger. 10 meters, prepare to attack. The soldiers raised their spears and roared as they made their final charge. Suddenly, some of the soldiers were stunned. This kind of charge was naturally aimed at people, but one person actually disappeared from their sight. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Suddenly, there was a slight sound of wind in the rainstorm, and then the curtain of rain in that place seemed to be affected by some kind of force and spun to the side. Then, red ripples appeared faintly. Charge! David roared as he carried Luke on his back and rushed forward under the eyes of the soldiers on both sides. Another figure was faster than him, and he jumped out of the crowd like a bolt of lightning. It was Michaud. He was the first one to break out of the encirclement, but after he rushed out, he slowed down and couldn't help but turn his head to look back. At that moment, David rushed out with Luke on his back, and two other members also ran out before the weapons reached them. After that, there was no after. The closest member was still in the middle of the encirclement. "Run!" David didn't stop and shouted. "Boss will get them out." These people had just run out of the encirclement and were far from out of danger. At that moment, the members of the gray space had already stopped. They gripped their short swords tightly and looked around fiercely. At that moment, they only thought that they had no way out and wanted to kill someone with their lives. Suddenly, hiss, 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 at the back of the group, the red ripples gradually increased and rotated around a point at a uniform speed. Soon, the curtain of rain around them became wider and wider, and a small red whirlwind was formed. "Get out of the way!" A faint voice came from the whirlwind. Harry subconsciously leaned to the side, and the small whirlwind swept past in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of the group, which was the center of the encirclement. "What is that? Kill them." The red whirlwind was so conspicuous that the soldiers at the front naturally saw it. However, the people behind them rushed forward one after another, and they had no choice but to passively send their spears forward. Whoosh, 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 the spears stabbed at the center from all directions. Storm! Swish, swish, swish! The red whirlwind suddenly expanded, and the rain curtain was thrown out in long lines. The soldiers felt a sharp pain in their hands, and their spears were shaken out of their hands. Then, their bodies were pushed forward by the force from behind. Explode, explode, explode! Amidst the continuous explosions, the narrow space instantly changed color, and the rain was completely covered by blood. The soldiers who rushed forward were directly swept up by the whirlwind, swallowed, cut, and exploded. The soldiers at the back only felt their vision turn red, and they were completely drenched in blood. Then, their weapons were taken away, and their bodies leaned forward. Help! Devil! Screams, wails, cries for help, screams of terror. It was as if a door to hell had opened in the middle of the field, and all kinds of sorrowful cries could be heard. The soldiers at the back could not see the situation clearly, but they were immediately hit by all kinds of flying things. This was a soldier holding a head, a soldier holding an eyeball, a soldier holding a thigh. God! Retreat! Amidst the cries of alarm, the tide-like soldiers suddenly paused. Some soldiers with quick reactions turned their heads and wanted to run back. However, it was impossible for the crowd to stop immediately, so the bloody scene was still playing out. Run! The ethereal voice rang out again. The members of the gray space behind him were also dumbfounded. Although the whirlwind intentionally avoided them, the blood and severed limbs would still roll over. They were also close to the whirlwind, so now they were all covered in blood. Damn it, what are you standing there for, run? In a short period of time, the speed of the red whirlwind had slowed down, and sometimes it even stopped. Oh, everyone seemed to wake up from a dream, and quickly ran away from the side where the whirlwind had stopped. At this time, if the soldiers who were running away turned around and stabbed with their spears, they could still make the crowd stay, but at this time they were all scared out of their wits, and were afraid that they could not run fast enough, so they did not think of attacking. After the members of the gray space ran away, the red whirlwind suddenly expanded again, as if to expand the swallowing area. This movement made the soldiers tremble in fear, and they screamed and ran away. At this time, the direction of the crowd had completely changed. Of course, among them, there were careless people who fell, and before they could get up, they were immediately trampled by several people. Boom! At this time, the skyrocketing whirlwind suddenly exploded, and a blood-red figure was directly thrown out. Puff! The figure in the air suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and then with a bang, fell heavily to the ground, and immediately spat out another mouthful of blood. Needless to say, this person was Tang Yin. At this time, he felt that his brain was buzzing, and his eyes were sometimes clear and sometimes blurry. The scene he saw was very distorted and very abstract. The storm was not that easy to use, and he was only at the beginner stage now, so he could not withstand so many attacks. While the whirlwind was slaughtering the soldiers on the outside, it was also ravaging his body on the inside. Boss! A figure rolled over like a gust of wind. Tang, and shook his head and responded unconsciously. Then he felt that he was being helped up, and then his vision turned black. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 179. In the evening, the rain had stopped. There were still traces of the storm on the leaves, and from time to time, drops of water would slide down the veins of the broad leaves and fall into the puddles, making a crisp sound like a string being plucked. Although this kind of sound rose and fell one after another, it made the small forest in the mountain range even more quiet. Some small creatures took advantage of this time to come out. A four-legged snake poked its head out of the cave and slowly crawled to a bush. That was where it hunted. After the rain, there were a lot of small insects. It wanted to take the opportunity to eat a full meal before going back to sleep. However, when it crawled over, it found that the bush was already occupied. Oh, it was a creature called a human. The four-legged snake happily stuck out its tongue. It didn't mind occasionally changing its taste. After all, humans were much more fleshy than mosquitoes. Of course, it usually wouldn't provoke such a creature because it was very dangerous. However, at this time, the human was motionless, as if he was sleeping. The naturally cold-blooded four-legged snake couldn't resist the temptation of warm meat, so it began to slowly approach the human. Decayed leaves, dead wood, creeping noiselessly closer, closer, and closer. Suddenly, a hissing sound could be heard. With a flash of the blade, the sleeping human flicked his wrist, and a pitch-black dagger fell from the sky. With a thud, it nailed the gluttonous four-legged snake to the ground. The four-legged snake screamed and struggled under the dagger. However, it was all in vain. Gradually, its small claws stopped moving. "Hey, boss, you're awake?" A surprised voice sounded as a big man walked over from the bushes. "Boss, you're awake?" Another young man with a feminine face walked over and observed for a while. "Please, David, you're still in the mood to joke at this time?" David scratched his head and said a little awkwardly, "I heard a sound. Look, boss's dagger is out." "Oh, it's true." The young man with a feminine face leaned over and looked at the snake that was nailed to the ground. Then he asked in confusion, "Why isn't boss awake yet?" "How would I know?" Michaud, do you think boss is pretending to be asleep?" Michaud couldn't help but roll his eyes. "David, not everyone is as boring as you." "Oh, David grinned, revealing a simple, honest, yes, silly smile. "All right, carry boss on your back, and let's go. The pursuers might be catching up soon." "They still dare to come? Don't you think you've been killed enough by boss?" David curled his lips in disdain. "That's enough." Michaud's expression was complicated, as if he had recalled something. His body trembled, and then he said helplessly, "But then the boss fainted." They all saw it. Boss will wake up." David snorted. "Let's see if they still dare to chase after us." After saying that, he reached out to help the person on the ground up and carried him on his back. Suddenly, David's body trembled as he cried out in surprise, "Boss, you're awake." "David, you're doing it again." Michaud frowned. Water, Michaud's mouth fell open. "Boss is awake." Water? Who? Water? "Oh, boss, wait a moment." Because it was right beside his ear, David quickly confirmed his words. He then put her down and quickly ran to a broadleaf tree to collect the water droplets on it. A moment later, a pool of water dripped down the leaves and into his mouth. Tang gradually woke up when he felt the cold on his lips. When he opened his eyes, there was no drip, no uniformed nurse. Only a huge head covered his eyes. He blinked. "This is, boss, it's me, David. It's over." David's face was full of anxiety as he stretched out his index finger. "Boss, what's this?" F***CK. "Take your hand away." Tang completely came back to his senses and said gloomily, "Who would recognize you if you were so close?" "Boss, you're finally awake." "Boss." In an instant, a dozen members of the gray space surrounded him. They were all very happy and excited. Tang glanced at them one by one and said their names silently in his heart. Then he heaved a sigh of relief. "Good, everyone's here. Where's Luke?" "Boss, I'm here." Luke walked over with a pale face, clutching his abdomen. "Okay, it's good that you're all here. It's good that you're all here." Tang nodded and then looked around his body. He was finally completely relieved. Fortunately, all the parts were still there. Storm was very effective in killing enemies, but at the same time, it hurt him a lot. Before he fully mastered it, it was a double-edged sword. "What's the situation now?" "Aren't we on grassland?" Tang looked around and asked. David replied, "Boss, you've been unconscious for a day. We left the grassland this morning and are still being hunted, but there's good news." "Unconscious for a day? Good news?" The scattered information gradually gathered. While Tang was unconscious, The members of the gray space continued to flee. The good news David was talking about was that they hadn't seen a single checkpoint after walking for a long time. It seemed that they had broken out of the encirclement. However, the current situation wasn't optimistic. The pursuers weren't far behind them. But perhaps they were shocked by Tang En's bloody methods on the grassland, so they didn't launch an attack for the time being. Tang En's injuries were still quite serious. After learning some simple information and confirming that he wouldn't be in any danger for the time being, he ate something and fell asleep again. The members of the gray space began to flee out of habit again. Because they had broken out of the encirclement, they didn't need to pay attention to their direction. What they needed to do now was to get rid of the pursuers behind them. When Tang En woke up again, it was already late at night. He was lying on a simple stretcher. The trees around him kept falling back, and unknown insects in the distance were singing in a low voice few. Exhaling softly, Tang En began to thoroughly examine his injuries. He moved his right hand. Yes, his forearm was sore in many places, and some parts were itchy. That was because his abnormal physique was constantly healing, but his right hand probably wouldn't be able to wield a sword for the time being. His left hand was much better. He clenched his fist and found that the injury wasn't serious. As for his body, there were a lot of itchy places. If he moved a little, he would feel a piercing pain. These were only external injuries. From the blood he spat out, it was obvious that his internal organs were also badly shaken. Fortunately, blood chi was different from fighting chi. It didn't need to go through those places. "Boss, you're awake." At the end of the stretcher was Michel. He saw Tang En constantly twisting his body. "How do you feel now?" "I'm fine." "Well, are those soldiers still chasing us?" "Yes, we just looked at them when we passed by the hill. They're about 3 or 4 miles behind us. There are about 300 of them. I don't know how many are behind them." Tang En nodded to show that he understood. The situation was not good. The deterrence wouldn't last long. At most, he could wait until tomorrow. Those soldiers would definitely launch a tentative attack. If he didn't fight then, the next thing would be an endless siege. When we rest later, find a higher mountain. Without a map, they could only stand on a high place and rely on their naked eyes to see if there was a chance to escape. Yes, now that the two sides were so close, and the soldiers didn't want to launch an attack immediately, there was no need to chase them day and night. When Tang En and the others found a place to stop, the soldiers sent people to observe and then set up camp not far away. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 180. The next morning, the grass was still wet. Everyone in the gray space ate a simple meal and began to climb the mountain behind them. They had observed it when they were resting last night. This was the highest mountain in the range of the naked eye. Tang En was unable to move, so David carried him on his back. "Boss, look." When they were halfway up the mountain, Michaud suddenly pointed behind him. Tang En turned his head and looked down from a high vantage point. A few miles behind them, rows of armored soldiers were walking towards them. There was no doubt that the soldiers also saw them. The two sides looked at each other for a while. "Good morning." Tang En waved his hand and greeted them. He turned around and said, "Let's go." "Good morning. Come on, we're waiting for you." "Ha!" Everyone waved their hands in that direction and shouted at the top of their lungs. Their cheerful voices reverberated through the mountains and lofty ridges, spreading far and wide. After so many days of pursuit, everyone had completely let go of their worries. According to Harry, they were all people who had died several times. He didn't care. The soldiers over there stopped for a moment and seemed to be looking at each other in surprise. The mountain was high, but the slope was very gentle and not very steep. It didn't take much effort for them to climb up. After about 10 minutes, they finally reached the top of the mountain. The morning in the north was very humid. Standing at the top of the mountain, the cold evening wind mixed with the smell of vegetation blew in their faces. As far as the eye could see, long dragon-like smoke spiraled around the mountain range. It was very spectacular. "Boss, how is it?" David tilted his head and asked. "Didn't you see it? Other than the mountain, it's still a mountain." Tangan looked around for a while and shook his head. Naturally, the most in the 100,000 mountains were mountains. The mountains in front of Tangan were all small, so there weren't many opportunities to escape. Then let's fly again. Strategy is not a skill. How can we eat all the time? If we keep using it, we'll be seen through. Tangan looked around and continued. Besides, although the height here is enough, there's no time to prepare. Those soldiers won't let us collect the vines and then go to the other side to tie them up. Schemes also needed the right time, the right place, and the right people. Obviously, it would not work. Tang sighed in his heart. It seemed that he could only use his last resort. Actually, when he heard that they had broken out of the encirclement last night and that there were only 300 soldiers chasing after them, he already had a plan in mind. If there was really no other way, then they could only scatter and escape. The area of the 100,000 mountains was boundless. It was relatively easy to hide someone in a situation where there were no soldiers around. Of course, this was not a good plan. Because the place was big, it was easy to get lost. Being alone in this dangerous place with no target and no companions, if one was lucky, one could be a savage for a period of time. If one was lucky enough to meet a passerby, one could still come out. If they were unlucky, they would either be savages for the rest of their lives or die at the hands of wild beasts. At this moment, Luke, who was being carried by another person, suddenly said, boss, apart from the mountains, there's also a river. Tangan was stunned. Yes, it's right there. Luke pointed straight ahead. Where? David narrowed his eyes. Why can't I see it? Everybody looked in the direction Luke was pointing at, but they couldn't see anything other than mountains and fog. River. Tang's heart skipped a beat. He then stared at Luke and asked, Are you sure there's a river there? It's a little blurry, but I'm sure it's a river. Luke hesitated for a moment, but still gave an affirmative answer. Gasp! Tangan took a deep breath and patted Luke's shoulder. I'm suddenly glad that you have no sense of direction. Well, thank that boring god of light. When he took away your sense of direction, he also gave you this magical vision. After saying that, Twain spread out his hands. So, who here knows how to make a raft? The direction is due west, and it's about 60 kilometers away. Michaud and the others have been there for less than 4 hours, and it will take them an hour to make a raft. So, Tang sat on the ground and looked at the people around him. We need to stall those soldiers for 5 hours. What do you think? We will listen to you, boss. David was the first to speak. Tang rolled his eyes. Learn to think. Don't rely on me for everything. You'll have to be independent in the future. That was Tangan's real thought. He didn't want these people to just be obedient subordinates. They needed to be able to find effective ways to quickly adapt to and survive in whatever environment they were put in. The job of an assassin, or rather, the art of assassination, was essentially a battle between people. If you didn't have a brain, you could easily be killed. Oh, David scratched his head and pretended to be deep in thought. Forget it. Harry, do you have any ideas? Obviously, it was wrong to ask David for ideas. Among them, Harry's brain was the most active. This was also the reason why Twain had recruited him into the gray space. Boss, we can make some traps. Harry rolled his eyes and said, That's a good idea. Tang nodded and said, But we don't have much time right now, and the traps we can set up can only be small ones. Apart from the time we set up, we won't be able to stall for long. Do you have any other ideas? Maybe we can. Harry looked at Tang unhesitantantly. Speak. Tangan's heart skipped a beat, and a smile appeared on his face. Harry gritted his teeth and said, Maybe we could take advantage of these soldiers' fear of you, boss. That's right. Tang was very pleased. This was exactly his idea. How exactly? What's the reason? Encouraged, Harry quickly said, We'll go back down the mountain the way we came from, boss. This will intimidate them so that they won't dare do anything. Secondly, it'll prevent them from climbing the mountain. After all, we don't know if any of them have the same vision as Luke. If they do, they'll definitely attack in advance to stop us when they see the river ahead. Haha, very good. Tang clapped his hands and laughed. Let's do that. Together with the trap from before, we'll work on both fronts. No, boss, your injury. David was the first to object. Tang Un's injury wasn't light. He hadn't dared to move since yesterday because he was afraid that the newly healed wound would accidentally open up. This was also why Harry hesitated at first. It's fine. Tang Un waved his hand indifferently. There's always a price to pay if you want to get away. David, help me up. David hesitated, but still reached out his hand. He and Michaud had been in contact with Tang Un the longest. He knew that as long as the boss made a decision, it wouldn't change because of these small circumstances. Following David's arm, Tang Un took a few deep breaths and stood up with a muffled groan. Such a simple action, but it caused his face to turn even paler. David turned his head and clenched his fists. He couldn't bear to watch. Boss, the soldiers are going up the mountain. The member who had been staring at the foot of the mountain shouted. Tang Un looked back and saw that the hundreds of soldiers at the foot of the mountain were coming up from the foot of the mountain with long spears. From time to time, they would raise their heads and look over. They came at the right time. Let's go and meet them. Tang Un waved his left hand and was the first to walk down the mountain. The slope of the mountain was very steep. It was easy to go up the mountain, but one had to be careful when going down the mountain. If one wasn't careful, it was possible to fall down. Tang Un waved his hand behind him. David, I'm fine. Keep 2 steps away from me. Raise your head, stick out your chest, and keep smiling. Sigh, your smiles are so ugly. If they followed blindly, it was inevitable that they would be seen through. On the contrary, the more above board they appeared, the more difficult it would be for the other party to figure out. They didn't walk far before the soldiers below discovered them. Immediately, the soldiers walking in front stopped in their tracks. Some of them even rubbed their eyes in disbelief. They came down. They actually came down? What the hell is going on? The soldiers looked at each other in dismay, their expressions changing. In the battle on the grassland, the tragic end of their companions who ran at the front was still in front of them. A few captain-like people walked out and pointed at them, as if they were discussing something. However, their opinions seemed to be divided, and they didn't seem to be able to convince each other. Tang Un didn't need to think to know what these captains were talking about. It was nothing more than guessing the reason for their actions. Was there a conspiracy? Behind the mountain was a cliff. They had no way to retreat, so they walked right into the trap. The soldiers at the foot of the mountain had complicated thoughts. Everyone on the mountain also had their own thoughts. Tang Un's senses were extremely sharp. He knew that David had been secretly glancing at him from behind, especially at his forehead. Although his steps were extremely steady now, there were already many small beads of sweat on the side of his forehead. This was a natural reaction to the pain in various parts of his body. As for Harry on the other side, he was slightly adjusting his breathing from time to time, looking a little nervous. Tang Un knew what he was thinking. He should be afraid that his plan wouldn't succeed and end up harming everyone. The others had similar reactions, either nervously swallowing their saliva or muttering words like God. Ha! Tang Un suddenly cracked a silent smile. Although everyone had all kinds of complicated thoughts, he could hear the firmness and fearlessness in their footsteps. This was the result of their recent training. As long as they didn't die this time, they would definitely be touched, of course. Tang Un still didn't think of the most important point. The reason why everyone was like this was because he had been walking in front. Tang Un and the others took about half an hour to go up the mountain before. It was faster to go down the mountain, only taking about 20 minutes. At this time, 10 minutes had passed, and the pursuers below finally reacted. Under the command of the captain, the soldiers raised their spears and formed a defensive formation in place. Boss. Harry's lips trembled. Calm down. Tang Un didn't look back and still strode forward. Now, let's speed up. Everyone was a little nervous when they saw that the soldiers didn't retreat. But when they heard Tang Un's order, they immediately chose to obey unconditionally. They slightly accelerated their pace and walked down the mountain. They were still afraid. Unlike the others, Tang Un saw the soldiers' reaction and felt more confident. The reason was simple. These soldiers had dozens of times more people than them, but they chose to defend in place. If this wasn't fear, then what was? The soldiers watched Tang Un and the others speed up and couldn't help but hold their breath. Some people couldn't help but look at the captain behind them. However, their captain couldn't give any constructive orders at this time. They looked at the people in the gray space who were walking quickly and were a little stunned. 11 minutes, 13 minutes, 15 minutes. He was getting closer and closer, Tang, and could almost see the fear in the eyes of the soldiers in the front row at this time. Speed up. A slight voice came out. Tang and touched his nose very indifferently and scratched his hair, wiping off the sweat on it. Everyone began to trot without hesitation when they heard this. In just a few steps, they set foot on the same place. The neat and firm steps were like the momentum of an army. Hua! The soldiers moved slightly, and the spears in front of them began to tremble. Step. It was unknown if it was the first step, but a hole appeared in the defense line of the soldiers. Then the second, the third, the first group, the first row, the soldiers began to retreat. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 181. Before the sun rose, an absurd scene was playing out in the nameless mountain range. 200 to 300 brand soldiers in armor began to retreat in the face of more than 10 people in cloth clothes and short swords. The neat defensive square formation became uneven. Don't retreat. Stop, go back. Violators will be punished by military law. The captains waved their swords and slapped the armor of the soldiers, hoping to stabilize the formation. The soldiers who were blocked hesitated. According to the brand's military law, deserters could be beheaded. So most of the soldiers stood still and trembled as they raised their spears. Whoosh! Tang In, who was running, turned his hand and flashed a dagger. He smiled slightly. Whoosh! In the eyes of the soldiers, this smile was the standard smile of the devil. The scene of broken limbs seemed to appear in front of their eyes. The legs of the soldiers in the front row trembled, and they began to retreat involuntarily. This time, the retreat was even greater. Some soldiers even began to turn around. He's bluffing. Don't retreat, don't retreat. A captain roared. However, not many people listened to him at this time. The soldiers' minds were now filled with thoughts of getting as far away from this devil as possible. Bang, bang. 2 soldiers who turned around to escape were directly slashed to the ground. The captain glared at everyone with his sword. Who dares to retreat? You're standing at the back. Of course not. That's right. Go up if you dare. Who? Who said so? Come out. The captain's eyes were bloodshot as he glanced at the crowd viciously. No one dared to look at him, and no one came out to admit it. However, the soldiers on the periphery were still quietly retreating. You're all a bunch of F***king cowards. The captain cursed and strode out of the formation. He went straight for Tang. He knew that if he did not prove anything, the soldiers would continue to retreat. Sure enough, when the soldiers saw the captain's actions, they could not help but stop and watch silently. The people in the gray space on the opposite side were shocked. Of course, they knew about Tang and's current situation. David was instantly anxious. He immediately waved his sword and rushed out. Don't move. A piercing voice came from the front and froze David's footsteps. Then, the crowd saw Tang In holding a dagger in his hand. His speed suddenly increased, and the strong wind blew the corner of his clothes as he rushed down. Boss! Instantly, everyone's eyes turned red. In the past, every time they saw Tang In swinging his dagger at the enemy, they were full of confidence. It was a piece of cake for Boss. But now no one had any confidence. It was all their fault for not being strong enough. Not only were they unable to help, they were always a burden, causing their boss to have no choice but to step forward bravely time and time again. It was all their fault for not being strong enough. Everyone secretly clenched their fists. They had never been as eager to increase their strength as they were now. The distance between the two parties was already very close due to the constant acceleration. Now that Tang In and the squad leader were running with all their might, the two of them met in just 3 minutes. Tang Un's arms, chest, lower abdomen, legs. The intense pain from every part of his body was constantly attacking his nerves. However, He remained unmoved on his face. His eyes were fixed on the captain's raised sword. This was destined to be a one-on-one duel. No one could help him, and no one could replace him. He was the nightmare of those soldiers. As long as he could still fight, those soldiers would never be able to raise their fighting spirit. Kill. The sword had a natural distance advantage compared to the dagger. When the squad leader saw that Tang and had entered his attack range, he immediately roared and stepped forward to slash down with his sword. Tang enacted as if he did not see it and still crashed straight into the squad leader's body. That's it. All the soldiers exclaimed in their hearts. They were all people who had fought in battle. Naturally, they could see that the speed of the sword was definitely faster than Tang Un's. Hiss! In an instant, a red line appeared and disappeared. A round object soared into the sky, and blood splattered everywhere. All the soldiers widened their eyes. Their gazes followed the round object as it rose, and rose again. They naturally recognized that object. It was the squad leader's head. What happened just now? They saw the demon pass through the sword like a phantom, and then the bloody dagger was raised. It was that simple, that casual. With just a light wave, the squad leader's head flew up. At this time, the head had risen to the top, stopped, and then fell. Bang. Tang In grabbed the head with one hand and swung his arm. Whoosh! Like a child playing with an elastic ball, the head fell in front of the soldiers. It bounced up, fell down, bounced up, fell down, rolled. All the soldiers lowered their heads and looked at the head that had rolled to their feet. The squad leader's eyes widened. Anger, panic, surprise. The soldiers dared to swear to the god of light that they had never seen such a gaze that contained so many meanings. Run, God, demon. Amidst the screams full of fear, the soldiers collapsed. Like the sea at low tide, all of them retreated. Because it was downhill, many of the soldiers tripped and rolled down the slope. But even so, they quickly got up from the ground and staggered to the rear. Almost no one dared to look back, as if that would devour their strength to escape. It was precisely because of this that no one noticed that Tang In, who had just finished killing, was still standing, leaning on the headless corpse. Huff, huff, huff. Amidst the incessant panting, Tang In desperately held on to the corpse. At this time, his vision turned black, and the strength in his body dissipated bit by bit. Can't fall, I can't fall. Tang In, focus. As if hypnotized, the black clouds in front of Tang In gradually dissipated, and he finally saw the clear world again. Huff! Exhaling a long breath, his body swayed twice. Tang In looked down at the corpse in front of him, stretched out his left hand, and patted the other party's shoulder. You're a man. Thank you, I'm sorry. He let go, and the corpse fell to the ground with a plop. This was indeed a respectable, iron-blooded man. He should not have ended his life in such a tragic way. But as long as Tang In did not faint midway, the battle just now was destined to end like this. What he needed was a clean kill to intimidate those soldiers. Originally, Tang In was thinking of catching a soldier who ran away to establish his dominance. But when the squad leader rushed out, Tang In knew that the opportunity had come. Was there a better way to establish his dominance than this? So, it was only natural for him to say thank you. As for the apology, it was because Tang In did not kill his opponent as openly as everyone thought. He used his killing intent before the giant's sword reached him, causing the squad leader to pause for a moment. This moment was very short, and other than the person involved, no one could see it. Boss! David was the first to rush over and grab hold of Tang In. Following that, the rest of them surrounded him. F***CK, stop swaying. If you keep swaying, I'll really fall. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 182. Of course, the retreat of the soldiers was only temporary. They also had orders, so they gathered again a few hundred meters away from the foot of the mountain and set up a defensive formation. There was still a lingering aura, and they had the intention of stalling for time. Tang In and the others were naturally not in a hurry. They slowly walked down the mountain. When they reached the foot of the mountain, David chopped a wooden stump, and Tang In sat down. Both sides were in a stalemate. At this time, the soldiers who were waiting for battle were a little confused. What were they trying to do? Why did the momentum that had sped over earlier suddenly die down? There must be a conspiracy. There must be a conspiracy. Compared to the soldiers who had complicated thoughts, Tang In was much calmer. After sitting down, he felt relaxed. He looked around and sighed. I just need a feather fan to be possessed by Zhuge Wuho. Naturally, such a situation would not drag on for long. After Tang In observed a slight commotion among the opposing soldiers, he immediately pretended to turn his head casually. David, you and Harry quarrel. Make it look like you're attacking and scare them. Quarrel? Why would I quarrel with Harry? Do we still want to fight? David scratched his hair inexplicably, grabbed his sword, and looked at Harry. Tang In opened his mouth and quickly said, Wait, I'm not asking you to fight Harry. Oh, then you mean to fight the soldiers? I understand. David suddenly realized and was about to step forward. F***CK wait. Tang In grabbed David and almost broke out in cold sweat. It was not easy to get the current situation. You should be thankful if the other party did not attack. How would he dare to take the initiative to provoke them? It's pretending. Pretending. Do you understand? Sigh. Harry, do you know what I mean? I know. Harry nodded. Great. Tang In was in tears. If everyone was like David, he would not be able to live. You're responsible for teaching David. Quickly. The soldiers on the other side saw that the gray space did not move for a long time and were a little suspicious. It was true that they were worried about Tang In's terrifying strength, but they were even more afraid of some conspiracy. One had to know that they had suffered a lot before, such as setting fire to the camp, being ambushed halfway, flying people, and so on. The other party seemed to have endless ways to harm people and escape techniques. Not only were they unable to catch anyone, but they were also constantly losing comrades. This pursuit was simply a nightmare for them. Why is there still no movement? Could it really be a bluff? What did the squad leaders say that time? But now, they're moving. The soldiers who had been watching immediately saw a new movement in the gray space. A strong man with a big sword couldn't help but rush over, but he was stopped by a fat guy. Then, the two of them began to quarrel. This is internal strife? Did anyone hear what they said? I couldn't hear it clearly. I only heard something about attacking, ambushing, something. Are they really going to attack? Yeah. Why is that fatty pointing behind us and to the side? Did you point? Why didn't I see it? I think he did. I saw it too. He quickly retracted it. Could it be that there are people lying in ambush next to us? Nonsense. Do they have the manpower to ambush us? I think they're stalling for time. No, they weren't 13 people before. Why are there 11 left? Finally, a soldier noticed that 2 members of the gray space were missing. It's true. There really is a conspiracy. But what can 2 people do? Don't be careless. Have you forgotten that these people burned more than 10 transport teams in one night? After that, a person who looked like a squad leader couldn't help but look behind and frown. Come on, check the surroundings for me. Yes. Dozens of soldiers bowed and slowly retreated from the back of the team, scattering to the surroundings. It had to be said that when a person repeatedly used tricks and achieved miraculous results, it would be a huge deterrent to his opponents. The soldiers were completely traumatized, so much so that they felt suspicious when they saw the other party's actions and words. Now, let's turn our attention back to Tang In. Harry, what should we say? Well, I'll go first. Harry looked around and rolled his eyes. The weather is good today. David, have you eaten? I ate, but it was too simple. It's not as good as the rooster from last night. David finally understood and emphasized a certain word. That's right. Harry pointed around carelessly and quickly retracted his words. I think the abs of the rooster is the best. Haha, rooster doesn't have abs. It's called breast meat. No, abs sounds better. Breast meat. Abs. Cough, cough. Watching the 2 clowns engage in a heated debate over this matter in all seriousness, the corners of everyone's mouths were crooked as if they had a toothache, and their faces were twitching like spasms. In order to prevent themselves from laughing out loud, they lowered their heads and cleared their throats or covered their mouths with their hands to cough. The two sides continued to be in a stalemate in this strange atmosphere. Tang and also saw that there were soldiers scouting around, but he really didn't mind it at all. It would take time for Michaud and the others to make a raft. He wanted these soldiers to search as carefully as possible. Well, it would be best if they dug every guinea pig hole. About half an hour later, the sun had completely risen from the horizon. It was ghastly pale. The soldiers who were scouting around returned one after another. Of course, they didn't find anything unusual. As for David and Harry, they talked about everything from the weather to food to interesting childhood stories. Their mouths were dry and their tongues were dry. "Captain, let's attack. They are obviously playing with us." A soldier said so. "Yes, Captain. I think they are stalling for time. That person is also a bit suspicious. He has been sitting there all the time. Was he just holding back before, but in fact his injury hasn't healed at all?" It was only a matter of time before they found out that something was amiss. After all, Tang Yin and the others were all talk and no action. The shelf life of the previous Yue was only so long. "Wait, let me think. What do you think?" These more than 300 people were just scattered teams. They were temporarily put together by the teams that were chasing the grassland the most. There were 4 captains. Just now, one of them died, and the remaining 3 immediately had an urgent discussion. The soldiers who were shouting the most fiercely now were the captains who had just died. Previously, because of a moment of cowardice or because they followed the trend, they retreated. Now, after such a long buffer, the soldiers' fighting spirit was reignited. They were determined to avenge their decapitated captain. The discussion didn't take long. After a few minutes, the captains reached a consensus. Attack, or rather, a probing attack. They decided to send a team of soldiers to attack first. There was no doubt that this order was received by the soldiers who were eager to avenge their captains. "Boss, what should we do?" "They are going to attack," David said anxiously. "I see." Tang Yin stood up with the help of a tree stump, then took a step forward to stabilize his body. "In this case, of course, we should run." Before Tang Yin finished speaking, a burst of light and scattered footsteps suddenly came. Everyone's hearts trembled as they looked around. This kind of scattered noise meant that there were quite a few people here. Southeast. Tang Yin's ability to identify the direction of the sound was needless to say. He immediately confirmed the source of the sound. It was from the rear of the soldiers. Tang Yin could distinguish it from a few hundred meters away, let alone the soldiers who stayed there. When they heard the footsteps, they panicked. The attacking teams also stopped and turned their heads to look back. "Everyone, don't panic." Who was the one who checked the rear? A captain roared. "It was us. We checked the area a few hundred meters behind us. There was nothing unusual." "Damn it, then what is this?" the captain said angrily. The soldiers were a little sullen. Only 2 of Tang Yin's men disappeared, so there was no need to check the situation within a 10-mile radius like when they were marching. Now that these sounds were obviously coming from afar, they had no choice. "Do you think this is the reason why those guys stopped here? They sent people to look for their accomplices to surround us?" The captain gasped when he heard this. His mind was racing. No wonder they were missing 2 people. No wonder they didn't do anything. They were stalling for time. Combined with the various traps and schemes that they had fallen into before, the captain felt that this was the truth. "Everyone, listen to my orders. Quickly return to the defensive formation. Listen to my orders later and be ready to break out at any time." "Yes." The soldiers surrounded the city in a semicircular square formation. Naturally, they were facing the rear. At this time, they had temporarily forgotten about the people in the gray space. After all, there were only a dozen of them. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was getting closer and closer. The soldiers held their spears tightly and stared at the mountain road 1,000 meters away. Closer, closer. They're coming. Whoa. Wow. A low roar of shock, speechlessness, joy, and other emotions rang out. It turned out that there were rows of soldiers holding spears and wearing brand standard plate armor that appeared from the mountain road. Needless to say, These were the people who had fallen behind during the chase. The soldiers who arrived later were also a little confused. After all, anyone who had just turned a corner and saw a large group of people holding weapons in front of them would be shocked. If not for the fact that their plate armor was very eye-catching, the first wave of attacks would have been launched. Good timing. Coming back to his senses, the captain let out a long laugh. The burden in his heart was lifted. The rear troops will be the front troops. Now attack those damn people. With reinforcements, the captain felt a lot more confident. He directly ordered the soldiers to press forward. Aren't you very good at killing? I'd like to see if you can kill 1,000 people. Captain, they're gone. The soldiers in the front row turned around and shouted. What? The captain was stunned. He quickly pushed the crowd aside and walked forward. Indeed, the place where those people had been standing was already empty. Only a tree stump was left there. Damn it, chase after them. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 183. D****. The captain was furious. Judging from the current situation, the other party was undoubtedly stalling for time. Although he didn't know what they wanted to do, when he thought about how he had obediently cooperated and foolishly stayed with them for such a long time, his face burned. His face felt like it was on fire, and he felt a sense of defeat in terms of intelligence. Don't let me catch you. Otherwise, I'll definitely let you have a taste. Boom! Just as the resentful captain was venting in his heart, a loud noise suddenly came from the front. What's the situation? Captain, there's a trap. A trap? The captain was stunned for a moment and came to the front of the team. He saw a thick tree trunk tied with vines in the middle of the mountain road. A few soldiers had been smashed under it and were letting out horrifying cries at this time. The live buckle was hidden by the side of the road. A brother stepped on it. A scout saw the trap and quickly analyzed. Little tricks. You. The captain pointed at 5 soldiers in one breath and ordered, you stay to save them. The rest of you follow me and continue the chase. Scouts, scout ahead. You still want to stall for time? I won't fall for your trick again. The captain thought that he had seen through Tang En's trick, so he dealt with it very decisively. Sure enough, there were all kinds of small traps along the way. The scout broke out in cold sweat as he solved them. The damage of the traps wasn't that great. They were either falling logs or twisting ropes, which would only injure people but not kill them. The most ruthless one was a beehive, which made everyone spend a lot of effort. However, as the captain said, these were just little tricks. They looked more like a child's prank. Of course, the scouts would never think so. Although these traps were small, they were all ingenious. The success rate of them cracking them was very low. Many of the traps were directly caused by the soldiers. However, because they were all harmless small traps, the soldiers didn't complain. They just thought that the scouts were only cracking the big traps that would harm people's lives, so they didn't care about these small traps. They didn't know that these scouts were about to go crazy. After all, they were the ones who were walking in front the most. For example, a stone that looked like it had rolled down from the mountain in front of them. This was a very normal situation on a mountain road, and could often be seen. The scouts didn't think too much about it. A few of them went up to move it. After all, there were still hundreds of people behind them. It would waste a lot of time to go around the rock. However, the moment they moved, a problem arose. They were directly hit in the face by a wooden stick that was swung towards them, and a few of their teeth even fell out. Another example was when they found a shortcut in a remote area. After careful observation, they made sure that no one was passing by. Moreover, they had also made a trip there and did not trigger any traps. Thus, he immediately reported to the captain and suggested that the soldiers pass through here. In the end, just as they were about to pass through, they were suddenly blocked by a huge rock. The scouts were dumbfounded. They dared to swear to the god of light that there were no boulders here just now. After a while, the scouts completely lost their confidence in cracking the mechanism. Forget it. Just let them crash into it. They wouldn't die anyway. Right now, they felt that these mechanisms were like the products of another system. It included the control of the opponent's mind, the understanding of their habits, and so on. Just as the scouts were about to slack off, they discovered another anomaly. In the middle of the two hills ahead, the mountain path was shrouded in thick white smoke. From the smoke, it was easy to tell that it was not naturally produced. It was obvious that someone had ignited the fodder that easily produced the smoke. That was why the situation before them had occurred. The scouts were troubled by the smoke. They had observed the terrain left and right. Within a radius of a few miles, this was the only path. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that there was a problem. If they went in like this, they were worried that they would fall into an ambush. However, if they did not go in, they would not be able to explain themselves when the main force arrived after hesitating for a while. The few of them decided to explore the area where the smoke was thin first. It would be best if they could find something. If not, then they would just accept it and bite the bullet and go in. In the end, they were lucky. After walking for more than 10 steps in the smoke, they discovered an anomaly. It turned out that there were some logs, dead branches, and other things by the side of the road. After knowing the situation, they immediately retreated and waited for the main force to arrive. A few minutes later, the captain hurried over with the soldiers. At this time, the soldiers were somewhat embarrassed because of the mechanisms along the way. What's the situation? The smoke was very conspicuous. The captain immediately asked after seeing it. The scout stepped forward and told him his judgment and the situation he saw. Don't worry, this is just a trick. The captain waved his hand indifferently. He was now wholeheartedly thinking that Tang In and the others were just stalling for time. After saying that, he was about to order the soldiers to enter the smoke. Wait, another captain walked out with a face full of panic and said, "Don't you think this formation is a bit familiar?" Familiar? Think about how those supplies were burned. The captain's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Then cold sweat dripped down. That's right, there were branches by the side of the road to block the back, and then a big fire was set. Cough, cough. That's not necessarily true. At most, they walked for 10 minutes more than us. How would they have time to set up such a large-scale trap? The captain immediately thought of something that did not make sense. Have you forgotten the two people who disappeared from the beginning? Hiss. The captain sucked in a breath of cold air. A chill ran down his spine. You're saying that they schemed against us from the beginning? All the way until now? According to the captain's current thinking, Tang In and the others had already predicted that the stalling tactic would succeed. Those two people came here in advance to set up everything. As for the small traps along the way, they were to reinforce the stalling tactic that he had previously thought of. Just like what he said just now, they were deliberately mystifying. Then, when he bumped into them, he realized that this was not a stalling tactic, but a real trap. A trap within a trap? A trap within a trap? It was really scary just thinking about it. Then what do we do now? After the captain's careful consideration, it was obvious that he also believed that there was a trap. We'll go over the mountain and go straight to the front. If this is a trap, then we'll be flanked by the troops behind us. If not, we'll just waste another half an hour. Half an hour. They won't be able to get far. What a good plan. All right, let's do that. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 184. It was undeniable that the suggestion of going up the mountain was the best of both worlds. It could prevent a sneak attack and bypass this dangerous place to continue the pursuit. The only thing they needed to spend was only half an hour. The hill was not tall, and the soldiers saw the top of the hill after a quarter of an hour. Do you think they're down there? A captain looked at the smoky mountain road and asked. They should be. How could these guys who like to play tricks give up this advantageous terrain? Haha, that's good. I'm really looking forward to their expressions when they see us behind them. Oh, that must be very exciting, huh? In the eyes of these captains, Tangen's plan had been seen through, and it was time to slap them in the face. Imagine, when those people were surrounded from the front and back, they would righteously say, "You asked for it. It's just a small trick. War is not that simple." Young people. Haha, they would be able to release the anger in their chests. With such a happy mood, they climbed to the top of the mountain. Then, there was no then. They looked in front of them and were collectively petrified. There was a conspicuous stone tablet at the top of the mountain, and it was engraved with the word sword. Even if you accompany me for 1,000 miles, we must part in the end. Everyone, farewell. Carrot, carrot, gray space. Well, the words were very particular, and the language was very polite, but it was a bit tongue-twisting. And what did the weird symbol at the end mean? I'm leaving, you pure goods. Well, the handwriting was very ugly, the tone was not kind, and there were even typos. It was obvious that it was written by an uncultured person. Cough, cough. Please allow me to formally introduce myself to everyone. My name is Harry. Ha is Harry. Lee is Harry. Half of the words were left behind, as if it wanted to write something else, but it was stopped. There were a total of more than 10 sentences, either ridiculing, indirectly ridiculing, or continuing to ridicule in a roundabout way. Every word hit the heart, and every sentence was infuriating. This they expected us to leave from here? Nonsense. The captain, who thought Tang and was stalling for time, said with a black face. That's not right, leave. It's only been half an hour. Where could they have gone? Someone saw through the hidden meaning of the stone tablet and asked in astonishment. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. That's right, although it was indeed depressing to be predicted again. But even so, how could they shake off their pursuers in such a short period of time? Captain, look in front. While everyone's attention was on the stone tablet, a scout observed the surroundings out of habit. The three captains raised their heads in unison. Their gazes crossed the tall stone tablet and looked ahead. At this time, the sun had already risen halfway into the sky, and the mist in the mountains had already dissipated. In the distance, a shiny silver ribbon pierced into the eyes. Is that a river? It's over. Damn it. Although the captains were not very intelligent, they were still familiar with military geography. Combined with the words on the stone tablet, it was obvious that those people wanted to cross the river first. However, if that was the case, were you still stalling for time? So those two disappeared too? The captain howled and squatted down while covering his face. Hypnosis. When a person was extremely weak and in despair, they would often cover their eyes. This meant that they did not want to look and did not want to think about it. The captain's mind was in a mess. Why? Why was it that every time he thought he had guessed the opponent's thoughts, he would find out that it was just a trap? Was he thinking too much, or was the opponent thinking deeper than him? The soldiers were also silent. The feeling of being toyed with in the palm of someone's hand was naturally not pleasant. Roar! The captain, who was bent down, suddenly stood up and roared at the sky. Then, with a swoosh, he pulled out his sword and rushed 2 steps toward the stone tablet. This thing was really too much of an eyesore, especially in such a situation. Bang, bang, bang. The captain obviously thought that the stone tablet was Tang, In, and the others. As everyone looked at each other, he repeatedly slashed at it with all his might. In just a moment, the stone tablet cracked and dust flew everywhere. Looking at it, one could feel the pleasure of crushing bones and scattering ashes. Huff, huff, huff. The captain heaved a sigh of relief and withdrew his sword. Suddenly, his body paused again. The soldiers also opened their mouths wide and stared blankly at the place where the stone tablet broke. There was actually another small stone tablet there. Obviously, it was hidden behind the vertical stone from before. The person who destroyed the stone tablet is an idiot. In appraisal complete. Clang! The sword fell to the ground. After a moment of silence, the desperate roar sounded again. I want to kill them. I want to kill them. Kill, kill, kill. At this moment, a few miles ahead. Huff, huff, huff. Hurry, hurry. The river is almost there. Tang In lay on David's back and kept urging everyone. Bo, boss, you're lying on your back. Don't your legs hurt? I'm almost out of breath from running. David swallowed his saliva and ran with all his might. TSK, it seems that we have to strengthen our training in the future. You can't even run after running for such a short distance? Tang In smacked his lips and said leisurely, Back then, your boss, I ran for 1,000 miles for a month in order to kill someone. Mountains, jungles, peaks, and other terrains were like flat ground. That speed, that spirit, What happened in the end? That person died? David's eyes lit up, and he asked curiously. After a hard battle, we couldn't kill him in the end. Tang In touched his nose. Shoo! Everyone hissed. At first, when they heard about the 1,000-mile chase, they were boiling with excitement. Who would have thought that it would end so badly in the end? TSK, what do you know? AB asterisk TCH stirred things up. Otherwise, Tang In said discontentedly. B asterisk TCH? Ha ha huff. Boss, you are too lame. David laughed wildly and sped up again. Seeing that they were about to break out of the encirclement, everyone was in a good mood. They simply picked up Tang In and started joking. Tang In didn't mind. He curled his lips and said, that B asterisk TCH is called Sylvia. If we meet down there, I will let you have a try. Okay, I would like to see it. David looked indifferent. TSK, your courage is commendable. When the time comes, I will place a bouquet of flowers in front of your grave. Tang In turned his head and said, did you hear anything? No. Everyone shook their heads. However, in an instant, an even louder voice came from afar. I will kill you, I will. The aura was very scary and the tone was very desperate. Everyone looked at each other at first, then burst into laughter. Ha! I said that my words must have angered him. You should be more literate. There are only a total of 10 words, and there's even a typo. Ha! Yours is better? Lori was long-winded and didn't get to the point. I still think mine is a little more lethal. Everyone laughed and joked as they ran forward. The sound of flowing water was gradually heard, and the air seemed to be filled with the smell of water plants. After turning around a hill, the road ahead became clear and spacious. The river that looked like a silver ribbon from afar was vast and boundless up close. Moreover, from the splashes from time to time, it could be seen that the river was flowing rapidly. At this time, on the shore, there were 2 people anxiously looking at them. Haha, boss, you are finally here. Michaud quickly came up to them. How is it? Is the raft ready? Tang In asked anxiously. It's ready. Michaud pointed to the ground in the distance, where there was a large wooden raft made of vines and green bamboo. Very good. Let's go. Tang In looked behind them. There may be a group of lunatics behind us. Huh, madman? Michaud was surprised. Haha, I will tell you later. David smiled and patted Michaud's shoulder. It's a pity that you are not here. Michaud was puzzled. Soon, the raft was pushed into the river by everyone, and they all boarded it. Then, they waved the thick wooden planks and rowed into the river. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 185. As the sky darkened, the fishes sank to the bottom of the water to rest, and the birds returned to their warm nests to rest. The sun rose, and the sun set. This was the objective law that most creatures in the natural world followed. Of course, as the leader of all creatures, humans were the same. However, in the forest to the west of the 100,000 Mountains, there was a group of people who were still busy. They were called the Gray Coat Army. They did not have a fixed home and were now being pursued, so they did not follow the laws of nature. At this time, a girl in a white robe was walking through the forest. It was obvious that she was very popular. From time to time, people would greet her. Kind old people, childish children, courageous young men. She seemed to be able to remember their names. She would call out their names and smile in response. She would then stop and chat with the people who greeted her. She walked to the center of the group. There were many people here, and there were guards guarding the periphery. However, the young girl wasn't stopped in the slightest. She greeted him with a smile and was allowed to enter. Finally, she walked to the side of a middle-aged woman who was slowly drinking soup. Perhaps she was afraid of disturbing the woman, so the girl did not make a sound. However, the middle-aged woman saw her first. She smiled and held the bowl of soup. Josiah, you're here. Have you eaten? I've eaten. I'm sorry to disturb your dinner, Aunt Rosa. The girl stuck out her tongue and said coquettishly, It's no big deal. There are many things more important than dinner. Rosa smiled and waved her hand. She then put down the bowl of soup and stood up. Come, accompany me to have a look around. Josiah nodded. Ha ha, Leader Rosa, are you going to take our chief magician, Miss Josiah, for a walk again? An old man in armor walked over and laughed. Old General Omeng, you're here again. Josiah pursed his lips. Ha ha, Josiah, don't worry about him. You are indeed the chief magician. You're now an intermediate magician. Rosa laughed softly. Intermediate? Omeng was stunned at first. Then he was overjoyed. That's great, as expected of a genius magician. Congratulations, Josiah. TSK. When you become an archmage one day, our Grey Coat Army will have another strategic figure. The so-called strategic level was an existence that could affect the war situation to a certain extent. In fact, if used well, an archmage could decide the outcome of a small-scale battle. Archmage. Josiah opened his mouth with a resigned expression and said, Old General Omeng, you're overthinking things. Archmages were indeed powerful, but becoming such an existence wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. One had to know that magic also had bottlenecks. Every time one leveled up, there would be a small threshold. The biggest bottleneck was the transition from a great mage to an archmage. This required heaven-defying timing, luck, and so on. Take Sessman, for example. He was a beginner grand magician and was almost 70 years old. One had to know that he had entered this level 10 years ago, and it hadn't changed at all. Of course, magicians also had a unique advantage, which was that their lifespan was generally longer. Therefore, many mages have been working hard to level up year after year. After chatting with old General Omeng for a while, Rosa brought Josiah out of the place. Along the way, the people were also used to it. One had to know that after Josiah came to the Grey Coat Army headquarters, Rosa often brought her around, perhaps because they hit it off, or perhaps because of other reasons. This kind of walk was very casual. Sometimes it was a walk after dinner, and sometimes it was to inspect the various departments. During this time, the words were also scattered, and some were just chatting and joking. Sometimes, Rosa would also explain to her the reasons for doing so based on some things. Oh, right. After chatting for a while, Rosa seemed to have thought of something. Josiah, I saw the propaganda slogan you wrote last time. It's very good. After this siege, we'll go to the towns and cities to distribute it. However, there are some changes in it, and I've made some slight changes. The purpose of our Grey Coat Army is to fight for the rights of the civilians, but there are some things that we don't need to say in a very dogmatic way. Well, we don't want to teach the civilians to believe, but to teach them to think. What they understand by themselves will only produce beliefs when they fight for it. Teach them to think. I'll remember it. Josiah repeated a few words silently and nodded vigorously. Haha, a magician's brain is really good. I heard that you've almost remembered the names of most of the people in the team, Rosa said jokingly, and then continued. In fact, these words have already been said by someone. At this point, Rosa paused and seemed a little hesitant. Did someone tell me about it? Josiah blinked and then shrugged casually. Yes, when Tangin tells me something, I have to think about it myself in the end. Josiah did not know that if Tangin was not here, he would be in tears. He did not let Josiah think about it. He was just fooling around too much and could not continue. Or he knew what was going on, but did not know why. So, he could only pretend to be enigmatic in the end. As a man, he always wanted to save some face. Well, do you know? Rosa looked at Josiah and said, Since I joined the Grey Coat Army, I've had many companions around me who have fought with me. Some are still there, and some have unfortunately been sacrificed midway. I'm very sad when someone dies. Some time ago, I was worried that you would be depressed because of Tangin. Well, I'm sorry. I can only deal with that matter in this way. I hope you don't blame me. Blame you? How could I? At that time, the situation was really chaotic, and it was inevitable to give the wrong order. Later, Officer Bull also apologized to me. And Josiah raised his head, and his eyes were firm. And I don't believe that Tangin will die at all. He's so powerful. He will definitely come back at some point. Well, he definitely will. Looking at the confident Josiah, Rosa opened her mouth and finally stopped talking. Instead, she clasped her hands in front of her chest and said, "I hope so. Let's pray for him together." Well, Josiah nodded and bowed his head to pray. A moment later, after the prayer, the two looked up and smiled at each other. Suddenly, Rosa said seriously, "Josiah, let me ask you a question." "Well, it's very serious." "Oh, please ask." Josiah pretended to be serious. "You trust Tang so much. Do you like him?" Rosa stared at Josiah and asked. "Ah, ah." Josiah opened his mouth in an instant. With a serious expression, he was petrified. Then he recovered and pursed his lips. "Aunt Rosa, you're asking this question again. Ah, it must be. Your face is red." Rosa squinted and smiled as if she had discovered a secret. "Of course not," Joshua argued and covered his face with his hand. "It's your question that's too embarrassing." "Oh, I see." Rosa nodded slightly and guessed. "Then it's Borg?" "Well, I often see you two together recently." "That's right. Borg is indeed more handsome than Tangan." "Oh, no." Josiah blushed and waved his hands. "Borg came to me for work. He taught me something." "Not him." Then who is it? Tell me. I'll check for you. If I think it's okay, I'll create opportunities for you too." Josiah was stunned and decisively turned his head and ran away. "I'm not talking to you anymore." When he was a dozen steps away, he bowed and saluted from afar. "Goodbye, Aunt." After that, he turned and left. "Hey, don't go." "Huh." Rosa covered her mouth and chuckled, as if her prank had succeeded. After a while, Rosa stopped laughing and looked around. She snorted and walked to the back of the team, where the logistics department was located. "I miscalculated. I should have asked later. Now I can only go alone. She does look like you when you were young." A voice as calm as water, and a simple man holding a sword without any sense of existence, emerged from behind without a sound. Well, yes. Rosa seemed to have known this would happen. She did not panic at all. "So, you want to choose her as your successor?" "Oh, why do you think so?" Rosa was slightly surprised. "You're teaching her step by step, aren't you?" The man with the sword said calmly. "I'm teaching her things, but—" Rosa shrugged. "But I'm not old yet. How can I choose a successor so soon?" "You're cursing me." The man with the sword nodded. "You're right. Not yet." "That's right, huh?" Rosa frowned slightly. He regained his composure and walked to the left. Old General Omeng was rushing over. "You'll need it when you leave. Unfortunately, you don't know how to do this." The man with the sword looked at Rosa's back and sighed. Old General Omeng walked over and said urgently, "Leader Rosa, the scouts have reported that a large number of feudal lord soldiers are in front." "Feudal lord soldiers?" Rosa was shocked. "Yes, we were careless. They should be the feudal lord soldiers that were chasing us. No wonder those legions were chasing us at such a leisurely pace. They were trying to attack us from both sides," General Omeng lamented. "They were not careless. When they received the news that the brand was going to carry out the 6th encirclement, they knew that the feudal lord soldiers would be involved. However, those feudal lords did not listen to orders. They would not go all out just because of an order. The result was just as they had expected. The soldiers sent by the feudal lord were all old, weak, sick, and ruffians. When the small teams were transferred, none of them were defeated by the feudal lord soldiers, who knew that they would become a scourge. Let's go back to the command center," Rosa said decisively. "To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidian. Come. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 186. At dawn, the sky began to brighten. On the sparkling surface of the river, mist filled the sky, and there was silence. Suddenly, plop, 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 the sound of a dozen heavy objects falling into the water was heard one after another, followed by a series of strange cries and the sound of constant slapping on the water. These sounds caused a series of reactions on the calm lake. Suddenly, some wild ducks and water birds flapped their wings and jumped out of the reeds, *quickly flying away. After about 10 minutes, these slapping sounds slowly disappeared, followed by loud curses from the shore. F***CK. I'm freezing to death. It's so F asterisk king cold. You still have the nerve to say that. Didn't you build this raft? Why is it falling apart? It's been a day and a night. How would I know it would stay on the water for so long? Stop arguing. Hurry up and F asterisk king start a fire. Trembling, questioning, commanding. All kinds of voices came from the group of people on the shore. At this time, they were quite embarrassed. Each of them was like a drowned rat, shivering in the cold night wind. Without a doubt, this was Tang In and the others. After getting on the raft yesterday afternoon, they originally planned to row to the other side. They knew that when they reached the center of the lake, the current was turbulent, and their paddling speed could not keep up with the speed of the water. In the end, they were carried all the way west and just floated away. Originally, it was fine to float. Anyway, they had achieved their goal of getting rid of the pursuers. They could just wait until they reached the shore or a place where the water flow was slightly slower and then paddle. But who would have thought that they would not be able to stop drifting? They went straight to the next morning. That night, they were cold and hungry. It was a torturous night. Then, just now, the originally tightly tied vines loosened due to being in the water for too long, and the raft collapsed instantly. Fortunately, they saw the shore at this time. After struggling in the cold water for a while, they finally climbed to the shore. After staying in the wild for so long and going through training, it was naturally easy to make a fire. Tang In and the others lit more than 10 bonfires in one go, and then everyone curled up inside to bake. After a while, steam rose, and everyone finally felt the warmth. They slowly loosened their limbs and breathed a sigh of relief. Did you see that? Tang In placed his hands on a fire rack and exhaled white smoke from his mouth. You guys said that I was abusing you when we were training in the water. Look at it now. It's life-saving work. This was the truth. If it wasn't for the previous training, an ordinary person might not be able to make it to the shore in such an environment. Boss is wise. David squeezed the water off his clothes, then pointed to his growling stomach and said, "Then think of another way to get some food. I'm starving." Gulp, gulp. Their stomachs began to rumble. F***CK. Can you not mention eating? Someone protested with a pained expression. I'm injured now. What can I do? Tang and rolled his eyes and said, It's close to the water. Get some fish. Good idea. I'll do it later. After about 10 minutes, everyone's clothes were finally dry. After removing several bonfires, David and Michaud each took a few people to find food. Not long after, Michaud was lucky enough to return with a few wild turtle doves. As for David, who promised to catch fish, he came back empty-handed. Although the temperature of their bodies had returned to normal, the cold inside was still there. Tang asked his men to bring back a few ladle-shaped plants, cut them open, and hung them up to stew the turtle doves. As the saying goes, when there is food in the stomach, there is no need to panic. When everything was ready, everyone rested for a while before they began to walk leisurely. Because of the pursuit these days, everyone's hearts were always tense. Now, they finally found a chance to relax. Hey, what do you think this is? David looked around and asked. The 100,000 mountains, Michaud said indifferently. David was dissatisfied. You're talking nonsense. Why do you ask? Michaud rolled his eyes and looked at the mountains in the distance. Let's see when we reach the top of the mountain. After getting out of danger, Tang In and the others now had to find a way out. Without a map, they could only rely on the primitive method of looking into the distance. After walking through a plain, they entered the mountains. After looking around, they walked to the highest mountain nearby. They were now in a very relaxed mood. After all, even if they were barbarians in the mountains, it was better than being hunted down before. Not to mention, there were only two-legged creatures here. It took them nearly 2 hours to get to the bottom of the mountain. At this moment, Tang In suddenly frowned and raised his hand. Stop. A boss? David asked in confusion. Sure. Tang In stretched out his index finger and pressed it. Then, he listened carefully. This is the sound of horse hooves? Huh. Harry quickly leaned down and put his ear to the ground. In a few seconds, he jumped up. Boss, it's the sound of horse hooves. Yes, They are all a group of dark horses. Tang Yin curled his lips. Ah! Harry opened his mouth wide in shock. Boss, you can even tell this? Yes, as long as you have a pair of eyes, Tang Yin said as he looked at the large group of cavalry galloping over behind Harry. They hadn't expected to run into passers-by so quickly. They had thought that they would at least have to circle around a few times to determine their location, but who would have thought that they would arrive in one step? The group of cavalrymen obviously saw Twain and the others as well, so they rushed straight over. Boss, something's not right. Where have I seen this armor before? Luke suddenly asked. This belongs to that Lord Solomon, right? Tang narrowed his eyes and looked at the wolf head on it. David was shocked. Are they pursuers? Tang rubbed his forehead. Please, we've traveled at least a few hundred kilometers with the current. How could we run into pursuers? Well, put me down. David, you throw away your sword first. Everyone else, hide your daggers. We'll say that we're lost civilians. The cavalry was too fast, and Tang In and the others happened to be in the middle of the road. There was no time to dodge. Now, they could only make some preparations and wait and see. Clop, clop, clop. Suddenly, the sound of hooves could be heard behind Tang In and the others. Everyone looked at each other. What was going on? They had either not seen anyone for hours, or they had come in a hurry. Compared to the sound of hooves behind them, the cavalry that had appeared first was undoubtedly closer to Tang In and the others. There were about 100 of them. They were fully clad in metal plate armor and wielded long cavalry spears. Amidst the drumbeat of hooves, the cavalry quickly approached Tang In and the others. Not good. Tang In's heart sank. He saw the look in the eyes of the cavalry at the front. There was surprise, greed, possessiveness, and so on. Although he didn't know what was going on, Tang In already had a bad feeling. Clop, 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 hiss, hiss, hiss. When the cavalry got close, they didn't choose to rein in their horses immediately. Instead, they separated and surrounded Tang In and the others. Then, they kept circling around them, as if they were admiring their spoils of war. Clearly, they didn't come with good intentions. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 187. Their armor had long been abandoned during their escape from the grasslands, and their clothes were wrinkled after drying. Therefore, after putting away their weapons, Tang In and the others now looked like civilians. After the cavalry circled around them a few times, the leader raised his hand and raised his mask. He asked condescendingly, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Tang In looked around timidly, bowed, and said, Sir, we are villagers of Stone Village. We were fishing in the river last night and accidentally broke the rope. We drifted here for a night. Now we are lost. Of course, an assassin needed to be proficient in disguise. Disguise was not as simple as changing one's appearance. That was only the preliminary work. After changing one's appearance, one's temperament and speech also had to be adjusted accordingly. Otherwise, one would not be able to hide from the eyes of the observant. Of course, to achieve this step, one needed to be good at acting. As for Stone Village, of course, it was made up on the spot. How could such a vulgar name not be encountered? The cavalry glanced at them and nodded. So you are lost. What do you plan to do now? We want to ask, sir, where the nearest village is so that we can inquire about it. Hee, there is no hurry. The cavalry laughed twice, then curled the corner of his mouth and said, You are lucky to have met me today. I will find you a good place where you can earn gold coins. Isn't it better than fishing for a lifetime? Damn, it was not a good thing. He wanted to kidnap them. Tang In hesitated and said, Thank you for your kindness, sir, but we want to go back first. Without waiting for them to finish, the cavalry rode a few steps forward. The cavalry raised his lance slightly, and a dangerous light flashed in his eyes. What? You are not willing. His words revealed an undisguised threat. Now, the cavalry was only a few steps away from Tang In. At such a close distance, even if Tang In was injured, he could make his opponent bleed in an instant. But things would be difficult after that. They could not deal with more than 100 fully armed cavalry. You David saw that the lance was about to touch Tang In's forehead and could not help but rush out angrily. "Shut up." Twain seemed to be frightened. He quickly took a few steps back and blocked David's path. He bowed his head and said, "Then I'll listen to Sir Knight's arrangement." "Haha, very good." The cavalryman raised his head and laughed. Just as they reached this mandatory agreement, the sound of horse hooves finally came from the other direction. It was also a group of 100 cavalry. "So you're from the Bunny-Mouth Hua family." The cavalry leader narrowed his eyes and raised his spear. "Get into formation." The so-called rabbit-beak flower was, of course, the symbol of Lord Hogan's family. Hiss. The horsemanship of these cavalrymen was pretty good. They pulled the reins and turned their horses around, instantly forming a conical charging formation. As for Tang In and the others, they were pushed to the side of the mountain path. "Boss, what should we do?" David whispered. "Let's wait and see." Tang In shook his head. They were still some distance away from the mountain range, and David's speed was definitely not comparable to that of a horse. If they ran, they would be caught very quickly. The only thing they could hope for now was that these two groups of cavalrymen would fight. Then they might have a chance to escape. The group of cavalrymen also saw the situation here, but they did not immediately reduce their speed. They continued to charge straight ahead. "Ready!" the cavalry leader roared. He lowered his body and placed his spear in front of him. The horses under him began to dig the ground, as if they were about to charge immediately. The war horses were specially trained. They only needed a short distance of 100 meters to form an absolute charge. Therefore, when the cavalry leader saw the other party charging from afar, he did not move at all. Herod, the charging cavalrymen, suddenly stopped when they were about 300 meters away. This distance would not cause the other party to attack, and they could also form a second charge in the event of an emergency. "Oomph." The cavalry leader straightened his body and sneered disdainfully, as if he knew the other party would do this. A moment later, a cavalryman walked out from the other side with his spear raised high. He then slowly touched the ground, as if he had no intention of attacking. The cavalry leader waved his spear and ordered his subordinates to open a path. Then, the opposite group of 100 cavalrymen rode their horses slowly. They wanted to pass by. Of course, if they suddenly sped up midway, the cavalrymen who were watching closely would instantly meet them. "Damn!" Tang In saw this and shook his head regretfully. Obviously, the two groups could not afford a fight. Their escape plan had failed prematurely. The leader of the 100-man cavalry walked forward with his spear touching the ground. The leader of the cavalry looked at Twain and the others, raised his mask, and smiled. Not bad, brother. You just come out this early in the morning, and you've already gained something." "Haha. Fortunately, the god of light is protecting us." The cavalry leader smiled. Obviously, he was very satisfied with his results. "Haha. Congratulations, then. Thank you for making way, brother. I still have important things to do, so I won't chat anymore." "Well said, goodbye." Although the two cavalry leaders greeted each other with smiles, both sides did not let down their guard. When they reached a safe distance, they waved their hands and motioned for everyone to disperse. After this interlude, the cavalry captain led the group to the north. Tang In and the rest had no choice but to follow beside him. There were no other situations along the way, so the people in the gray space did not find a chance to escape. Those cavalrymen had iron masks on their faces, so Tang In and the others could not get any information. Judging from the current situation, it seemed that they were going to be sent to a place to work. After about half an hour, everyone finally arrived at their destination. This was a place that looked like a valley, surrounded by towering peaks that reached into the clouds. At the entrance of the valley, there was a fortified building. There were archers on top of the tall wooden door, and from time to time, a few groups of soldiers with spears could be seen patrolling. "Damn, we just escaped from the tiger's mouth and entered the wolf's den." Tang In looked at the tight defense around him and grimaced. After a simple greeting, the cavalry led Tang In and the others through the gate into the valley. Ding, ding, ding. As soon as they entered, the sound of hammering and pecking could be heard. Then, They saw carts carrying stones with a metallic luster being pushed in front of them. Some strong men were urging them with whips. "Boss, this is a mine. F***CK. These people are trying to get us to mine?" David scolded as he moved closer to Tang Yin. Of course, there were no excavators in this world. After finding the mineral vein, they would directly blow it up and then gather people with simple tools to go deep into the mountains to work. The hardships and dangers were self-evident. Moreover, these mineral veins were in the hands of great aristocratic forces. The stingy aristocratic forces were not willing to pay a high price for miners. Therefore, no matter how poor the poor were, they would not be willing to do this job. Generally, the miners were made up of slaves or prisoners, but there was no doubt that such manpower was far from enough. Therefore, some aristocratic forces would use all kinds of methods to kidnap people or pretend to offer a high salary to lure them, or hire some black-hearted mercenaries to act as human traffickers. Tang Yin and the others were unlucky. They just happened to meet the kidnappers and were directly caught. The cavalry took them to a wooden house and handed them over to a mine supervisor. They cheered and left. They were going to receive their reward. Since it was so difficult to recruit miners, there would naturally be a reward if they caught them. Usually, it would be a few gold coins per person. The fat supervisor took out a dozen pieces of paper from the drawer and slapped them on the table. "Sign this." Everyone looked at each other and picked up the paper from the table. "Damn it, are you kidding me? We have to work here for 5 years." Harry opened his mouth in shock and said angrily, "Privately arresting people to work as miners was not allowed by the Brand Law. But as the saying went, there were policies and countermeasures. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, the aristocrats would let the miners sign a voluntary contract. The paper that appeared in front of everyone now was the miner's contract. In fact, the only difference between this and the slave contract was the name. The supervisor lay on the wide chair, his eyes drooping, and ignored the crowd. Then, the door was pushed open, and a dozen burly men with whips in their hands rushed into the house and looked at everyone fiercely. The meaning was obvious. Knock, knock. The supervisor stretched out his fat hand with 5 gold rings and knocked on the table. "Now sign this." The members of the gray space looked at Tang Yin. They had killed a lot of Brand regular soldiers, so they naturally did not care about these burly men. Tang Yin pondered for a moment and walked out. "The contract can be signed, but we have people who are injured. You have to provide trauma medicine for treatment." Of course, it was impossible to make a move now. The defense here was tight, and they could not rush out if there was a conflict. Moreover, everyone was in the middle of a chase, and they were all injured, light or heavy. It was better to treat them here and plan the next step. "You still dare to ask for a King? Ugh." A burly man waved his whip and rushed out, wanting to show his power. However, after Tang Yin glanced at him, he was stunned. The supervisor did not notice this scene and waved his hand casually. "Okay, but the mine still needs to be mined." The mine was a dangerous place. They needed healthy miners, so naturally, there was a place for treatment. "Okay." Tang Yin was the first to step forward and sign Arthur's name. The mine did not care about real or fake names. They just needed a contract. David and the others naturally believed in Tang Yin unconditionally. Seeing that he agreed, they also stepped forward to sign the contract. Then, everyone was taken to a spacious wooden house with many simple beds. At first glance, it was obvious that it was a place for miners to rest. Working in this kind of work, it was obvious that the environment inside was dirty and messy. All kinds of unpleasant smells surrounded the nose. "This is where you will sleep. Other than those beds with things on them, you can choose one yourself. Here, this is the mining uniform. The pickaxes will be given to you when you go down the mine. After lunch, you can go down to the mine. Someone will teach you how to do it." The person who led everyone here was the burly man who was shocked by Tang Yin's killing intent. Although he did not know what happened at that time, he still subconsciously did not dare to deliberately make things difficult for them. Tang Yin nodded. "What about our medicine? I will send it to you later." After that, the burly man could not help but look at Tang Yin, but in the end, he shook his head and left. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come again. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 188. Naturally, there wasn't much to choose from among the rest of the beds. Everybody found a dozen, or so that were connected together, and sat down. Tang briefly explained his plan, and then told them to look for an opportunity to scout the surroundings. Not long after, the brawny man and a few others carried a stack of blankets and medicine over. The blankets were black and smelled awful, like the smell of a corner in winter. As for the medicine, most of them were low-quality ointment for external injuries, but it was better than nothing. Everybody quickly applied the ointment on their bodies. Luke used it the most. The wound on his abdomen was very long, but fortunately, there were no signs of infection. Tang didn't need any of that. His freakish physique allowed him to recover from his injuries all the time. Now, there were almost no external injuries left behind. Lunch was delivered directly to the house in a big bucket. Everybody had an equal share. Naturally, there wasn't any meat in it. The miners worked 2 shifts, either during the day or at night. So, nobody came in until Tang and the others put on their gray miners' uniforms and set off. The lofty mountain directly opposite the gate was the lode, and the mountain was densely packed with mines. Led by the brawny man, Tang and the others were given sharp pickaxes and baskets in a small hut. Then, they were assigned to one of the mines. The entrance to the mine was about wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. Every few dozen meters, there were illuminating crystals embedded in the walls. They were neither bright nor dark, and were dim yellow in color. After walking for a few hundred meters, an old man with a gray beard was waiting in front of the passage that led down. "Old Martin, these are all rookies. Give them a simple lesson," the brawny man said to the old man with the gray beard. "Okay," old Martin replied. The brawny man nodded, then turned to Tang and the others and said, "If you want to live a better life here and make some money, learn from old Martin." The miners' pay was not fixed. The system here was based on the more work, the more the miners got. Apart from the 10 kilograms of, or that had to be handed over every day, every additional kilogram of or they dug up would be worth 10 copper coins. If they dug up rare, or the price would be calculated separately. After saying that, the brawny man turned around and walked out of the mine. "My name is Bill. You can call me Old Bill. Come, follow me down." Old Bill led the way down the tunnel. The flight of stairs was very long. Tang and the others followed Old Bill down the stairs. After about 10 minutes, he finally reached the bottom. Then, they continued to move forward. The interior of the mine extended in all directions, and there were many forks. Old Bill was very familiar with this place. He led the group through 7 or 8 twists and turns as they ventured deeper. "Look, there's an arrow next to each of the illuminating crystals. That's the way out. Of course, after you've stayed here for a long time, you won't need it to guide you anymore. There's a bell on there, and when the bell rings, it means you can leave. The area in front of us has already been mined, so it's unlikely that there will be any ores here. Therefore, if we want to mine, we have to go deep into the end of every branch. This is a copper mine. If you find a blue plant in a place, then mine next to it, and you will usually find, or after you find the ore, don't dig blindly. It's very likely that you'll break the ore. If there's a rare ore next to it, then the loss will be huge. You can estimate the size of the ore based on its shape. Then, you can decide where to start digging. As for how to judge, there are a few tricks here. Along the way, Old Bill explained the main points and things to take note of while mining, while Tang and the rest nodded their heads in agreement. Since they couldn't leave for the time being and had to recuperate, they had at least solved the problem of food and clothing. There was also the medicine. After they ran out of supplies, the supervisor wouldn't care if they recovered or not. If they wanted to obtain these things again, they had to save up some money to buy them. Of course, when Tangen's injuries were better, stealing was also an option. "Then what are these? Are they also ores?" David asked as he pointed at the glass-like objects on the wall that were flickering with various lights. The deeper they went, the more of these things they found. Their light even overshadowed the illuminating crystals. Along the way, red, yellow, blue, green, purple, all kinds of lights bloomed. It was very beautiful and magical. Oh, that thing is called glass stone. It's useless. It's just that the color is bright, but the texture is very fragile. Old Bill looked and casually explained. This mine is very deep. It must have been mined for a long time. Tangan found a topic to talk about. Every time they arrived in an unfamiliar environment, they would have to collect all kinds of information. This was the quality of an assassin. Yes, this mine has been discovered for a few years now. Most of the ores inside have been mined. The mountain is almost empty. Last year, I remember it was last year, there were people who dug to the other side of the mountain. However, that place was immediately sealed. Old Bill had the usual habit of an old man. He was very talkative. It was probably because there weren't many people to talk to, so he followed Tangan's questions and said a lot. Under Old Bill's long-winded chatter, they finally reached the end of the mine. Old Bill first demonstrated by waving his pickaxe. He found a fist-sized copper ore and asked everyone to identify it. After that, he continued to guide everyone on how to use the pickaxe. Probably because the conversation was quite agreeable, Old Bill also talked about his many years of experience in finding ores. In this kind of environment, people couldn't feel the passage of time at all. Only when the bell rang did everyone realize that half a day had unknowingly passed. Everyone's results weren't very good. Some of them dug up a few pieces that were barely a few kilograms. Some of them didn't even dig up a single piece. Fortunately, they were all newbies. A few days ago, there was no strict rule that they had to hand over 10 kilograms of ores. They only had to hand over what they had dug up. Among them, only Tangan had managed to dig up 10 kilograms, which made Old Bill very impressed. He said that he was the first person who had managed to dig up so much in just one afternoon, even though he had been grooming rookies for many years. In fact, Tangan could have dug up more. However, since he didn't have any money, he didn't want to waste his energy. The reason why Tangan had such an achievement wasn't because of his fast comprehension or good luck. He had discovered that the peeping skill could vaguely see the ores that were buried shallowly. Since he had a target, it was naturally successful. That 10 kilograms of ores was dug up on a whim. Of course, Tangan wouldn't say this. He gave all the credit to Old Bill's guidance. This made Old Bill stroke his beard and laugh heartily. After handing the ores to David, everyone followed Old Bill out of the mine. At this time, the sun had already set and it was evening. Old Bill was chatting happily. When he found out that Tangan and the rest didn't live with him, he regretfully shook his head. However, he immediately patted his head and solemnly told Tangan and the rest to not provoke the miners in the wooden house. Tangan and the rest nodded in agreement. After handing over the ores, they bid farewell to Old Bill. Dinner was also to be eaten in the wooden house. It would be around an hour after work ended. If you didn't arrive by then I'm sorry, but you would have to spend your own money to buy it. Tangan and the rest entered the wooden house while secretly observing the guards. At this time, there were many people in the wooden house, making it seem very lively. Of course, the smell was even worse. David frowned as soon as he entered the wooden house. Boss, my blanket is gone. Boss, mine is gone too. Mine too. Tangan looked over in surprise. The beds that they had occupied in the afternoon were mostly empty. Among the 10 or so people, 7 or 8 of them had lost their blankets. Boss, over there. Misho suddenly pointed in a direction. It was a place against the wall and was considered to be in a good position. There were 3 sheets piled up on the bed, and a burly bald man was lying on the side of the bed. Perhaps feeling Tangan and the rest's gazes, the bald man sat up and cursed fiercely. Damn you! What are you looking at? Clang! Because he got up, the thick iron chain under his feet smashed heavily on the ground. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 189. Without rules, there would be no country. The Brand Kingdom naturally had a set of punishments for criminals. There were light punishments and heavy punishments. Light punishments included a fine of money, while heavy punishments included a day trip to the gallows. If the crime was serious but not serious enough to warrant hanging, then they would be locked up for a long period of time. Imprisonment in a different world was simple imprisonment. There was no need for labor. But at some point, some nobles thought of using money to buy these people to do manual labor. For example, mining, building walls, etc. Of course, those who were able to commit such a serious crime naturally had some skills. For these dangerous people, some restraining measures were necessary. If the hands had to work, then they could only do something about the feet. Wearing shackles was the most common method. The bald man who appeared in front of Tang In and the others was undoubtedly an example. You're asking for a beating. David had a fiery temper. When he saw the bald man cursing, he immediately stepped forward. Yo, newcomer, you're quite arrogant. The bald man stood up with a sinister smile. His tall and muscular body looked like a giant. Today, I'll teach you the rules here. Whoosh, there was the sound of beds and chairs being moved. It seemed like this was a common occurrence. The onlooking miners immediately moved away the debris and cleared the space in the middle. There were also some people who were also wearing shackles who started betting with smiles on their faces. Come on down, come on down. Titan versus the new brawny guy. If you bet big, you lose big. If you bet small, you lose small. If you bet on the miss, you lose to the madam. Haha, you're always saying this. I'm sick of hearing it. I bet on Titan. Count me in, I bet on Titan too. Before the two people in the field got close to each other and started fighting, the bets here were already very lively. Of course, most people bet on Titan. David also had a pile of money on his side. That was for an unexpected upset. After all, the two of them were similar in size. Their bodies were equally muscular. Hee kid, I won't beat you to death, but I like to hear the sound of bones breaking. Kaka, ha, I'll break both of your hands today. The bald man, called Titan, cracked his knuckles and walked into the field with a maniacal laugh. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Cut the crap. David stepped forward, his fist whistling through the air as he smashed it directly into his opponent's head. This was the result of Tang Un's usual training. As an assassin, he naturally had to strike first. Good. Titan roared and followed up with a lunge and a punch. Bang! With a loud bang, two hammer-like fists collided with each other. Their bodies swayed, and both of them involuntarily took a step back. Yo, you're a good fighter. You have some strength. The eyes of those who bet on David lit up. Naturally, they were aware of Titan's strength. Now that they saw David being able to fight him to a standstill, they couldn't help but praise him. Titan took a step back in surprise. Soon after, a sinister smile appeared on his face. Not bad, not bad. I can play a little longer today. David didn't respond, but waved his fist and attacked again. Bang, bang, bang. The two brawny men's muscles bulged as they engaged in the most primitive battle. Both of them seemed to be very confident in their own physiques. Both of them attacked with all their might and basically did not defend. In this way, the sound of fists hitting flesh could be heard frequently. It was very enjoyable to listen to. At this guy, the people who were shackled looked at each other in shock. Most Northerners had robust physiques, and it wasn't strange for them to have great strength. What shocked them was David's fighting skills. There was no fanciful move, and his attacks were decisive. With one look, they could tell that he was someone who frequently fought. Immediately, some of them shifted their gaze to Tang In and the others, sizing them up. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Tang In frowned slightly. Just as those people could tell that David wasn't ordinary, he could also tell that Titan wasn't an ordinary person. His punches were also decisive, direct, and unusually vicious. Moreover, there was a hint of desperation in them, as if he was from the army. Satisfying. Satisfying. Ha! Titan was so excited that he directly threw off the mining uniform he was wearing. His rock-hard skin was completely red, and there were countless knife, spear, and sword scars on it. Every time his muscles bulged, they looked like centipedes crawling on his skin. As expected, Tang In nodded in understanding. These scars could only be formed on the battlefield. Boom! Just as Tangan was thinking, David's punch with a force of 1,000 pounds was caught by Titan's large hand. Kid, if you don't have anything else to do, then let's call it a day. Boom. David's raised left fist was caught as well. Haha, vicious enough. I like it. Titan slowly straightened his hands and pushed David's arm back. Today, I'll break one of your arms. Mother asterisk cur, you talk too much. Bang! David stomped his foot on the ground. His arms were covered in yellow light, and in an instant, he pushed Titan's large hand back. What? His fighting aura? This is an apprentice warrior, right? The onlookers were in an uproar. Fighting aura was very common in the other world, but it definitely wasn't to the extent that a commoner would be able to use it. They originally thought that this would be a one-sided fight, but unexpectedly, there were so many accidents. Titan's eyes widened, and he seemed rather surprised. Good kid, you actually have fighting aura. But it's still not enough. As soon as he finished speaking, a red light suddenly appeared on Titan's arms. The color and thickness were heavier than David's. Clearly, his fighting aura cultivation was higher. This time, the onlookers weren't too surprised. Clearly, many people knew that Titan had this kind of strength. In an instant, the tables had turned again. David's fists were pushed back again, but he didn't give up. He was still trying hard to push back. Boss! Misho's sleeves moved slightly, and he looked at Tang and narrowed his eyes at David's arms and shook his head. Kid, give up. You can't beat me. Titan took a step forward and the ground cracked. David took a step back and ignored him. He was still tensing his arms. Titan saw this and laughed loudly. Haha, I like it more and more. Before he could finish, David suddenly let out a roar. The yellow light suddenly exploded, and he punched out with both his fists. Ha! Tangan grinned, and he laughed silently. It can't be he broke through. He broke through. That's insane. Looking at the soaring, fighting energy, the faces of the people with shackles changed greatly. There was actually someone in front of them who had broken through from a novice martial artist to a primary martial artist in the middle of a battle. This sounded really incredible. No wonder they called him a freak. Boom! Bang! Bang! With a loud bang, the wooden house trembled a few times, and then two figures were smashed out. Misho took a step forward and appeared behind a figure in an instant. He stretched out his hand and caught it. Thud, thud, thud. He took a few big steps back and stopped right in front of Tangan. Huff, huff. David gasped for air as he wiped the blood from his mouth. Boss, I've lost. Although David had succeeded in breaking through just now, he still couldn't compare to the other party's strength. After exchanging two punches, he was blasted away. Ha, this is so satisfying, so satisfying. Titan staggered a few steps back, but he still managed to stabilize himself with the support pole. Then, he strode forward. The members of the gray space all took a step forward. Titan stopped and made a defensive posture. What? You want to take turns fighting me? If it was before, Titan wouldn't have taken Tang in seriously. But after fighting with David, he couldn't help but be afraid. If these people all had fighting energy, he wouldn't be afraid of one or two. But if 10 people came at him together, he would definitely be defeated. On the other side, 5 or 6 people with shackles quickly came out and stood behind Titan. The two sides were in a stalemate. That's already very good. Tang In patted David's shoulder and smiled. This was the truth. When he saw David's fighting energy surging, he already had a feeling in his heart. But after David's fighting energy really broke through, he couldn't help but be surprised. This was definitely an unexpected gain. Then Tang In waved his hand. Everyone disperse. The members of the gray space retreated and stood behind Tang In. Misho also helped David to the side of the bed and sat down. In an instant, everyone's eyes focused on Tang In. Without a doubt, he was the leader of this group of people. At this moment, forget it, Titan. Don't tell me you haven't fought enough. A voice suddenly sounded. Tang In turned his head and saw a middle-aged man with a face full of vicissitudes of life sitting in the corner. His feet were also shackled. Looking at the metallic luster, It seemed to be much heavier than Titan and the others. Seeing Tang En look over, the middle-aged man nodded. Tang En returned a smile. Fry this. Titan seemed to have a lot of respect for the middle-aged man. When he heard his words, he hesitated. It wasn't that he was eager to continue fighting, but this matter started because of him. If he left it like this, it would be embarrassing. Sigh, seeing as we were once. I'll give you one more piece of advice. You better stop now, or the consequences will be unpredictable. The middle-aged man called Fry's side and said to Titan. Titan's expression changed. He instantly looked at Tang En. Obviously, he was quite concerned about Frey's judgment. And the only one in the crowd who fit the target was Tang En, who had been sitting there all this time. TSK, TSK. Tang En smacked his lips and looked at Fry again. It was obvious that Fry sensed something was wrong, so he reminded him. But even if Titan didn't come, Tang En would have gone up to him. No matter what, it was a fact that David was beaten up. If he didn't stand up for him, wouldn't it be a waste to be called boss for so long? Tang En raised his head and waved at Titan, indicating for him to continue. Okay. Titan took a deep breath, pushed away his companions around him, and strode back to the center of the field. Sigh. Fry saw this and sighed again. He shook his head and didn't say anything. Tang En smiled and sat there without moving. You just fought, so I won't take advantage of you. If you can walk in front of me, I'll consider it your win. How about it? If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 190. If you can walk in front of me, you win. How about it? Tang En's words were very clear, but everyone stood there stupidly as if they didn't understand. The wooden house fell into a strange silence. Of course, if you lose, break one of your arms. How about that? After the second sentence was said, the people in the room finally reacted. Immediately, all kinds of voices came. What do you mean? Arrogant. Titan, teach him a lesson. Is this guy crazy? Crazy? I think he's just looking for a way out. In an instant, the house went from extremely quiet to extremely noisy. Everyone was either mocking and ridiculing or shaking their heads speechlessly. They didn't think much of Tang En's words. Originally, if you were strong, you could just come down and fight. But you just had to come up with such a joke. It was really laughable. Good. Titan stared at Tang En, his face distorted and his body trembling. Let's do it like that. I'd like to see how you're going to stop me. But let me say this first. If I win, I'll break your arm with my own hands. If it could be said that Titan previously had some reservations about Tang En because of Frey's advice, then all those reservations had now been pushed away by the anger in his head. This is a great humiliation. No matter how weak I am, I shouldn't be so weak that I can't even walk. This is unforgivable. Tang En nodded and smiled. All right, please. Titan took another deep breath and raised his head to look at Twain. It was fine to be angry before, but when it came to a fight, the most important thing was to be calm. The scars on Titan's body showed that he had fought countless battles, so he naturally understood this principle. The distance was at most 10 steps. If he ran, he could cover it in an instant, but that would make it seem like he was afraid of him. Even if he walked, it would only take a few seconds after making up his mind. Titan lifted his leg and took a step forward without hesitation. Clang, the shackles on his leg hit the ground, making a loud noise. Titan was about to lift his leg when his hair stood on end and his body tensed up. Then, he became a little absent-minded. This feeling can't be wrong. Every time he was on the battlefield and met with life-threatening attacks, this was the feeling he had. Titan resisted the instinctive urge to step back and looked up again. The other party was actually smiling. Tang En was indeed smiling, or rather, that smile had not disappeared from the beginning. However, there was not the slightest hint of a smile in his eyes. They were cold, empty, and did not contain a trace of life. It was as if he was an iceberg in the extreme north, cold and bottomless. It was also like a bottomless abyss that led to hell, swallowing the void. The atmosphere in the arena was strange, and the audience outside the arena were confused. Discussions broke out. What was Titan thinking? Wouldn't it have been better to just slap his face and break his arm? Why did he stop after taking one step? What the hell? Those who were shackled did not participate in the discussion. They looked at Titan and then at Tang Yin. They were a little bewildered. As for Fry on the side, his face was extremely cold. His toes touched the ground and his body leaned slightly. His movements were not obvious, but those with good eyesight could tell that he had sensed danger and was about to attack. After a moment of silence, Titan began his second step. He raised his leg and swung it. The shackled ankle stopped in the air, but did not fall. It was as if he was facing a cliff. After a while, when the leg showed signs of trembling in the air, it finally fell slowly. First, it was the tip of the foot, then the arch of the foot, then the heel. It was as if he was stepping on ice, trying to test the thickness of the ice. He was extremely uneasy. The audience looked at each other and clamored again. This is the ground, bro. You can't even jump up and step on it. Is there something wrong with your eyes? Shut the F***CK up, all of you. One of the shackled men finally couldn't take it anymore and roared in a low voice. In this place, the fist was the biggest reason. These shackled men were still a deterrent. The crowd quickly quieted down. Clatter. The shackles were dragged on the ground. For some reason, Titan did not choose to walk in long strides. Instead, he slowly dragged his feet on the ground. It was really very slow. He was advancing inch by inch. Huff, 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 huff. His breathing gradually became louder. The audience was shocked to see that Titan's face was covered in sweat. He was panting heavily, as if he had just run 10 kilometers. But the reality was that he hadn't even finished his third step. At this moment, one of the shackled men came to Frey's side and whispered something. His expression seemed to be pleading. That Fry looked at the situation. After a moment of silence, he finally sighed and nodded. On the other side, Titan moved his feet and finished his third step. Then, he bent over and rested for a while. Bean-sized drops of sweat dripped down his naked body and fell to the ground. Steam rose into the air. Clatter! The fourth step began. The members of the gray space looked at Titan. There was not much gloating on their faces. Instead, there was admiration. They were the ones who understood Titan's feelings the best. When they were training, in order to make their nerves strong enough, their boss had used a lot of killing intent. That kind of feeling was enough to drive a person crazy. Compared to that, death was a light punishment. As Titan slowly took his fourth step, Tang Yin, who had been in a fixed position all this time, finally changed. His body began to tilt slowly. The 5 fingers of his left hand spread open and slowly reached out. The audience, who had been watching in confusion, suddenly shivered. Then they subconsciously hugged their arms. They felt an inexplicable chill descend. It was bone-chilling. On the other side, Fry suddenly stood up. Kill mute, kill mute. His voice was dry and hoarse, as if it had been blown out of a crack in the desert. Right now, Titan was extremely abnormal. His expression was ferocious and bloodthirsty. His eyes were sometimes clear and sometimes absent-minded. He was rarely clear and often absent-minded. Actually, if one paid close attention, they could see that every time he moved, he was only moving when his eyes were clear. Enough, Titan. Don't move anymore. In the silence, Frey's voice clearly reached everyone's ears. Right now, Titan's eyes were clear. However, after struggling for a while, he still slowly moved forward. Damn it! Fry cursed under his breath. He could see that Titan was on the verge of collapse, courting death. Tang Yin's eyes flashed. He had no intention of taking Titan's life in the beginning. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made that wager of breaking his arm. But now that Titan had given up and wanted to charge forward, he couldn't blame him. Tang Yin's extended left hand rotated. His 5 fingers slowly bent, as if he was going to crush something. Have mercy! Whoosh! A figure wearing a blue battle armor dashed forward. He grabbed Titan's shoulder and flung him back. How dare you? Tang Yin's clear voice rang out. His figure flashed, and a storm of blood-red light fell down. Ding, 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 bang, bang, bang. the sound of rain hitting a banana leaf rang out. Two figures came together and separated. Blue battle aura and blood red sword light clashed, tangled, and exploded, but in an instant, the blue figure was sent flying. Captain Fry. Amidst the cries of alarm, a dozen or so people with shackles on their feet madly rushed over and caught the cyan figure that was sent flying. It really was Fry who attacked just now. However, he was immediately attacked by Tang En's thunder after throwing Titan out of the killing intense range. Right now, blood was blooming in more than 10 places on his upper body. He was bleeding profusely and looked rather miserable. Fuck, brothers, let's do it. The 10 or so people's eyes immediately turned red when they saw Fry in such a state. They all pounced on Tang En. Stop. Bang. At this moment, the door of the wooden house was suddenly slammed open. Haha, Gopher, it's time for dinner. Why are you looking at me like that? If you like this work, you are welcome to come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 191. The miner's dinner wasn't exactly sumptuous. There's a hard black bread that could be used as a weapon and a bucket of vegetables of various colors. That's all. If you wanted to eat something better, you'd have to buy it yourself. After distributing the items to everyone, the fat chef looked at everyone in confusion. Finally, he shook his head, closed the door, and left. The people in the room naturally weren't in the mood to eat. They looked at Tang En, standing in the middle of the field with a complicated expression. Some ordinary people who didn't know martial arts even thought that Tang En was a magus. Otherwise, how could he defeat a warrior without even touching his opponent's body? As for the people with shackles on their legs, they knew that Titan was bound to lose when the chill descended. How could someone with such monstrous killing intent be easy to provoke? But they still didn't expect Tang En to be so skilled. Fry was sent flying with injuries in a single exchange. No matter what, the atmosphere in the field eased a little because of the food delivery. Tang En didn't intend to attack again. Fry stopped the dozen people who were charging at him. Ahem. Frey's body trembled, as if he was forcibly suppressing something. He then waved his hand and said, Everyone stop. Brother, I was wrong just now. Please forgive me. No matter what the reason was, it was true that he had rushed into the battle to help Titan. If the two sides had fought to the death just now, it would have been reasonable. After all, no one knew if you were purely trying to save someone or to help attack. No problem. Tang En said non-committally. Taking someone's life here would eventually be investigated. It wouldn't be good if he ended up in shackles. Besides, Fry had been taught a lesson, so Tang En didn't seem to care. Fry saw that Tang En wasn't going to pursue the matter and sighed in relief. He turned his head and said, Titan. He didn't finish his sentence, but his meaning was clear. Titan woke up from his daze with a pale face. He looked at Fry and nodded to express his gratitude. Then he raised his right hand and cleanly chopped down on his left shoulder. Crack! Without a sound, his arm fell limply. This was the previous bet, and Titan was very straightforward. Tang En nodded and walked toward Fry. What else do you want to do? The shackled men were shocked and quickly formed a defensive formation in front of Fry. Get out of the way. Fry ordered everyone to back off, his expression calm. This person is not simple. Tang En praised in his mind. He walked to Fry and bent down in front of everyone's eyes. He patted Frey's chest, and blood flashed in his hand. Damn it, you. When one of them saw the sudden burst of light, he thought that it was Tang En's sneak attack. He immediately threw a punch at Tang En. Bang! Stop! Fry quickly got up, grabbed the man's fist, and threw him to the back. Then he bowed to Tang En and said, Thank you. Of course, he knew the meaning of Tang En's action just now. It was to retrieve the blood chi that was wreaking havoc in his body. Haha, you're welcome. Since he couldn't leave in a short time, it was necessary to make friends with Fry, who was quite pleasing to the eye. After all, he had quite a bit of prestige here. All right. After taking 2 steps back, Tang En rubbed his nose and turned to the crowd. I don't want what happened just now to spread, so I'll have to trouble you guys. In silence, Everyone nodded in agreement. Thank you, Tang In gave a simple salute. The matter finally came to an end. Then, the shackled men awkwardly returned the quilt. Fry got some bacon and wine from somewhere and brought it over. With delicious food, Tang In and the others didn't stand on ceremony. They pulled Fry to eat and drink with them. Then, a few more people came over one after another. They sat together and chatted happily. Of course, Taitan and the others didn't come over. Tang In's habit of distinguishing the environment was deeply ingrained in his bones. There were mainly three groups of people in this room. One was the shackled men, led by Fry. The other was the group led by Taitan, and the rest were the ordinary miners. It was the first time they met, and they even fought a few times. The content of their conversation was naturally some pleasantries. There wasn't any valuable information. The only thing they knew was that Fry and Taitan were indeed from the army. Fry seemed to have committed a crime and offended a big shot. That was why he ended up like this. As for Taitan, he seemed to have been implicated by Fry and ended up here as well. After all the food was swept clean, the simple and crude meal ended. It was already late at night. Everyone climbed into bed and began to rest. Because the quilt smelled really bad, Tang In entered the system space as soon as he got on the bed. Ding obtained 80 blood chi. Ding obtained 50 blood chi. Ding obtained... Recently, he was constantly being hunted down, so Tang In hadn't entered the system space for a long time. As soon as he entered, he was startled by the constant system notifications. He didn't remember how many soldiers he had killed in total. Anyway, from the looks of it, it wasn't a small number. After a few minutes, the notifications finally stopped. At this time, his blood chi had soared to more than 13,000. He was quite close to the next level of 20,000. Ding! Killing intense skill leveled up to proficient. Ding! Empty kill skill leveled up to proficient. Ding! Go skill leveled up to proficient. Tang In opened his mouth. He was instantly ecstatic. No wonder he felt more comfortable using these skills recently. It was because of the leveling up. Looking at the soaring blood chi and the leveling up of several of his main skills, Tang In couldn't help but smack his lips. Sure enough, the battlefield is my world. This was actually both true and false. It was true because on the battlefield, although Tang In wasn't good at direct combat, the chances of killing people would increase by a lot. It would be a great help to his skill proficiency and the growth of his blood chi. But relatively speaking, Tang In's assassin level would be stagnant because he wouldn't get any experience if he didn't take any missions. Currently, he only had the mission to assassinate Sessman in the system's mission list. Of course, the current Tang In didn't have much of a desire to level up. After all, the current skills were enough for him to practice for a while. He had learned the lesson of biting off more than he could chew. At this time, the system space still looked like a primitive forest. The old butler was already resting in the exquisite wooden house. He definitely knew that Tang In had entered, but he didn't appear at this time. It meant that he didn't care about him. Tang In went straight to the training area, as usual, and began to practice his dagger skills. To be honest, Tang In's natural hand speed was really average. It couldn't be compared to the talented Michaud. But the old butler said that the human body was a small universe. No one knew where the limit was. There were only bottlenecks. As long as one broke through these bottlenecks, one's strength would be improved. Of course, if one wanted to break through these bottlenecks, one had to constantly train and train. No one's success was accidental. The system space had various methods to train one's hand speed. This was Tang In's unique advantage. But if he didn't spend more time and energy than others, the result would still be a mirage. Tang In's training tonight didn't go well because his external body shook 2 or 3 times. Although the shaking was very slight, it was still shown on the system space's light screen. However, when Tang In went out, he didn't find anything. He didn't feel any tremors, nor did he feel any signs of danger. This made Tang In, who had never encountered such a situation, quite confused. After thinking for a moment, he didn't wake the old butler to ask. After this shaking happened a few times, it finally subsided. Tang In trained for a few hours, then fell asleep in the system space. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 192. Bang, bang, bang. Come out, gophers. I'm feeding you every day, not raising pigs. Come out quickly. You don't want me to whip you awake. The sky was dark before dawn. A series of loud bangs on the door and insults woke the miners up from their sleep. After whispering to the female family members, the miners rubbed their eyes and struggled to get up from their beds. After that, he simply washed up and walked towards the mining area with the black bread that was enough for 2 meals. David raised his head and yawned. He rubbed the wound on his chest and muttered, "Damn it, these bastards. They made me look bad by banging on the door." "Ha, you're overreacting. You threw the bed over. TSK, you're really something?" David scratched his head and said, F***CK. How can you blame me? I thought they were chasing after us. Tang In looked at David, who had a sulky expression on his face, and could not help but laugh. When the overseers came to knock on the door this morning, David jumped out his bed and picked up the wooden bed next to him. He yelled, "Run and run." If it wasn't for Michaud, who was sleeping next to him, he would have thrown the wooden bed away. The people in the same room were not woken up by the supervisors, but by David's yell. They all looked at him dumbfoundedly and speechlessly. "Hey, that's strange. Look, why are there so many birds flying in the sky?" David suddenly pointed to the sky and said, "Haha, David, your ability to change the topic is too bad." Someone saw through David's intention and laughed mercilessly. David's face turned red and he said, "That's right. Look, it even crashed into the mountain. Stupid bird. Okay, let's go in. Old Bill is still waiting." Tang and waved his hand and drove everyone into the mine. Then he unconsciously raised his head. There were indeed many birds in the dark sky, but their flight paths were messy, as if they were a little panicked. TSK, the early bird gets the worm, but at least your eyesight should be better. Mining was not a simple physical activity. Tang In and the other novices had to learn for 2 days. When everyone arrived at the passage from yesterday, they saw Old Bill waiting there. There were a few other people beside him who seemed to have just arrived as well. When Old Bill saw Tang In and the others, he was very excited. After greeting them, he began to ramble on and on about all kinds of things. Yesterday, there was a miner who smuggled rare ores and was beaten half to death. His family told him to stop this year after he was done, and so on. Everyone was chased out of bed early in the morning, so their spirits are naturally not very good. Hence, they all responded half-heartedly. Old Bill didn't mind and continued to talk nonstop. When they arrived at the mine tunnel, Old Bill finally remembered that he still had something to teach them. Thus, everyone's ears quieted down. Next was the monotonous mining. Tang didn't have much interest in this. He activated his peeping skill and looked around. After digging up a few ores, he showed them to Old Bill, and the latter went to teach the others. Today, they were going to stay here for a day. Tang naturally didn't want to waste time. He found a place to sit down and took the opportunity to enter the space. After a period of time, he would come out to mine again. It could be considered as recuperation, training, and mining. However, when Tang entered the space again to train, the hologram suddenly began to tremble. He quickly came out and felt the ground shake slightly. This was an earthquake? Everyone, don't panic. Old Bill comforted the panicked crowd. This is only a slight tremor. It is normal in the mine. You'll understand once you stay here for a while. Old Bill had been mining for many years, so his words were naturally convincing. What happened next was indeed the case. The trembling soon calmed down. At this time, Tang In frowned. It wasn't that he didn't believe Old Bill, but after thinking about the tremors last night, he felt an inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. If there really was an earthquake in this kind of environment, no matter how strong one was, it would be useless. It shouldn't be so coincidental. Tang In suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. It was useless to think about it now. Before it was time, the miners were not allowed to come out of the mine. After that, Tang didn't enter the space again. Instead, He chose to stay outside and pay attention to the surroundings. However, perhaps it was just like what Old Bill had said. For the next few hours, the ground was calm and peaceful. When noon came, well, it was actually the time when everyone was hungry. Everyone took a break and took out black bread to eat. At this time, ring, ring, ring. HM? Everyone turned their heads and looked at the shaking bell above the crystal in the distance. They were a little stunned. It was already the day. Everyone follow me out. Old Bill stood up and said, "There might be a situation outside." Situation? Yes, there might be many possibilities. I can't say for sure. Let's go out and see. It was naturally a good thing to be able to go out. Tang was the first to walk out. On the way, they met many miners. It was like a small stream flowing slowly into the sea. People from all kinds of branches flowed out. After walking for about half an hour, everyone came out of the mine. At this time, the mine was not very peaceful. Fully armed soldiers had already gathered in the open space. Some war machines were also being moved out of the warehouse before they could see much. Tang In and the others were asked to return to their wooden houses. Brother Arthur. Just as they entered the wooden house, Fry, who had already returned, greeted them. Fry, this is... Tang In pointed outside and asked, "Oh, it should be a robbery. It has nothing to do with us." Fry didn't care. Robbery? Yes, Brother Arthur, you are new here, so you don't know. Everyone wants a mineral vein, but there are only so many that have been discovered. Naturally, there will be people who want to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. Understood. To put it bluntly, it was all about profit. The value of the ore was not low. Grabbing any mineral vein was like grabbing a gold coin assembly line. This kind of thing happens almost once a month. When the other party can't take it down, they will automatically retreat. After saying that, Fry smiled. This is also a good thing for us. At least we can rest for half a day. Ha! That's true. Tang nodded and smiled. The mine was under attack. The miners naturally had to be under unified management to prevent riots or to fish in troubled waters. Soon after, when everyone arrived, the door was locked from the outside. Except for Tang In and the others, everyone in the house was used to it. Some climbed into bed and began to sleep. Some took out their tools and started gambling. They were very happy to play. Damn, the security is really tight. When he heard Fry say that this place was often attacked, Tang and had some thoughts in his mind. But when he saw the soldiers constantly running in from outside, he couldn't help but curse. "Boss Arthur, do you want to play a few rounds?" A burly man who had eaten and drank with them last night greeted him. "Haha, thank you. You guys have fun." Tang and shook his head and walked to his bed. After 2 hours, a person casually looked out of the window and said in surprise, "Hey, why are there so few soldiers outside?" "Oh, it's true. They must have run into a tough problem. They didn't have enough manpower and transferred over." "It's very possible. Hey, do you think this place will be taken down?" "It's none of our business. Even if they take it down, we are still miners. Those people won't give us more meat to eat." That's true." Hearing their conversation, Tang In walked to the window. Sure enough, there were only a few scattered groups of soldiers left. However, there was still a large group of archers guarding the periphery. At this moment, while the door lock was pried open, and then the door was pushed open, everyone looked at the door and saw a large group of people rushing in. It seemed that they had just been through a battle. These people were more or less stained with blood. Clang, clang. In the continuous sound of metal colliding, some soldiers threw piles of swords, spears, and axes in front of everyone. Then, a middle-aged, burly man with a black beard walked out and glanced around. "I don't want to talk nonsense. From now on, you are all requisitioned. These are weapons. Come out after you choose one." Everyone looked at each other, a little confused about the situation. Some people with shackles on their legs had a slight change in expression. Obviously, the situation outside must be tense. Otherwise, they wouldn't have thought of them. This was just like on the battlefield. Sometimes, captives were used to fight. Of course, these captives were used as cannon fodder. The middle-aged, burly man with a black beard frowned when he saw no reaction from the crowd. He pointed casually and said, "You, Come out and get your weapon. Aye. The man opened his mouth and looked at the pile of weapons in front of him. He kept waving his hands and retreating. Whoosh bang! A powerful arrow instantly penetrated the man's forehead and sent him flying, crashing into the wall. Whoosh! Everyone was immediately in an uproar when they saw this. Squeak! A group of archers pointed their bows and arrows. The crowd immediately fell into silence. Now, does anyone else have any objections? If you like this work, you are welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 193. This was the situation they were in right now. Under the aim of the archers, everyone silently stepped forward and picked up a weapon. Very good. Now gather outside. The middle-aged man with a black beard nodded in satisfaction. He then licked his lips cruelly. Let me remind you again, don't have any dangerous thoughts. Otherwise, you will die miserably. He then turned and walked out of the wooden house. Everyone had no choice but to follow him out. Many frightened miners had already gathered in the open space in front of the door. They were surrounded by soldiers with spears and archers with longbows. Soon, the miners in the other houses were also chased out. Everyone gathered together and was herded to the entrance of the mine. Some people with shackles on their feet were secretly observing their surroundings. Of course, there were some who had ideas. After all, no one wanted to be cannon fodder. However, the soldiers on standby along the way kept dispelling their ideas. Tangan looked at the situation from afar and shook his head. Unless everyone started a collective riot, there was no way they could break through the encirclement now. However, most of the miners were ordinary people. Before they could foresee the situation they would face, they did not have the courage to risk their lives. Brother Arthur, what do you plan to do? A mosquito-like voice sounded in his ear. Tangan raised his eyebrows and looked on without batting an eyelid. He saw Fry slowly approaching with the shackled men in the room. Titan and the rest were among them. There's nothing I can do. Brother Fry, do you have an idea? Fry looked straight ahead and spoke again. Not now. I want to find some people to form a team. Brother, you are very strong. Can you come in and take care of us? Tang understood. Frey's words were very polite. He was looking for cooperation. These people were born in the army. They naturally knew what they would face. In a battle, the strength of an individual was insignificant. If they could form a team, their chances of survival would be much higher. Tang naturally agreed with this suggestion. He nodded slightly. Brother Fry, you are too polite. We will do as you say. All right. Fred was overjoyed. Just as he had said, Tangan's strength was obvious to all. David and the others were not weak either. If he could rope in this group of people, his chances of success would increase by several folds, whether it was to save his life or something else. After reaching an agreement with Tang Yin, Fry quietly moved to the side and began to rope in other people. Under the pressure of the soldiers behind them, they walked for about 5 to 6 minutes before finally arriving at the entrance of the mine. Under the pale white sunlight, the scene was a mess. The thick wooden door was riddled with holes, and there were even gaps in some places. Arrows were flying in from all directions. As the wild wind blew, the tail feathers of the arrows rustled. Both sides seemed to have entered a temporary resting period, so Tang Yin and the others did not see the battle scene when they arrived. Instead, he saw the overseers running around, constantly moving the corpses on the ground and on the walls. Then, new soldiers stood in place. Then, some arrows, rolling logs, and other defensive equipment were carried up the wall. Creak! The miners who had been driven to the entrance looked up and saw the wooden door in front of them open. Nearby, there were corpses everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. In the distance, a black mass of soldiers holding shields, swords, ladders, and logs slowly pressed forward. Damn it! These bastards, they're using us as a city wall. Fry walked over and cursed with an ugly expression. He had been on the battlefield before, so he understood the current situation at a glance. Now that the door was broken, it would not be able to withstand the next attack. So, he simply drove the miners out and blocked the front, forming a human wall. Get out, get out. The soldiers at the back kept pressing their spears against the backs of the people, driving them out. Now, even the civilians who were not familiar with the war knew that the situation was not good. The soldiers in the distance kept pressing forward. If they went out now, wouldn't they become targets? Damn it, they're forcing us into a dead end. Let's fight it out with them. A loud roar came from the crowd. Then, a few people waved their weapons and charged in the opposite direction. Seeing that someone took the lead, the group immediately turned around and was about to kill their way back to the mine. Bastards, you're asking for death. Attack! Whoosh, 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 puff, puff, puff. The spear-wielding soldiers at the back coldly raised their spears. White blades went in and blood spurted out. Then, a rain of arrows whistled and shot toward the back of the crowd. Help! Amidst the tragic cries, the civilians who were left behind fell like wheat being harvested. In an instant, the warm lives turned into lifeless corpses. Tang In and the others were at the front, so they avoided the disaster. However, looking at the tragic situation behind them, they did not feel lucky. Damn it! David's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He waved his sword and was about to attack. Pa! Tang In grabbed his shoulder and shook his head gently. Boss, Brother David, it's useless. You can't save them. Frey's eyes twitched, and he said with a pained expression, this was the truth. In this situation, not to mention David, even Tang In could not do anything. The miners at the back were frightened by the bloody massacre. They desperately squeezed to the front. Those who wanted to return were also involuntarily brought forward by the crowd. Bang! After everyone left the mine, the gate at the back was slammed shut. At the same time, it also shut off their hope of escaping. The attacking soldiers did not care whether these people were miners or not. At this time, they had already reached the entrance of the valley, completely blocking the crowd in the middle. Fry said in a low voice, later, everyone try to grab a shield and then retreat to the side. Yes, Captain. Those who were shackled responded without hesitation. I never thought that there would be a day when I would fight side by side with everyone. Even if I die today, I have no regrets. Frey's expression was a little complicated when he was called captain. He shook his head and said to Tang In, Brother Arthur, do you have any other suggestions? Brother Fry, you don't have to be so polite. I don't know anything about battle formations. It's better for you to command. We'll just listen. This was not a polite remark. As the saying goes, every profession has its own specialization. If it was a small situation, Tang In was confident that he would not lose to anyone. However, if he were to be the one leading the charge, then everyone would be in for a tragedy. Okay, now is not the time to be polite. Fry agreed and then waved his spear. Charge to the front. The first round of attack must grab a shield. At this time, most of the miners saw the rows of advancing soldiers, and their hands were numb and their legs were weak. They kept retreating. When they suddenly saw such a group of people rushing to the front, they hurriedly got out of the way. After a while, everyone reached the front line. At this time, the enemy soldiers were only a few dozen steps away. The retreating crowd had been compressed to the limit. Suddenly a long bugle sounded. The attacking soldiers collectively raised their weapons and began to charge with a roar. The distance of a few dozen steps was covered in the blink of an eye. Tang In could even clearly see the blood vessels in the enemy's eyes. Kill! Fry roared and stabbed with his spear. When everyone heard the order, they immediately took a step forward and waved their weapons to confront the enemy in front of them. The two sides fought in this narrow valley. Bang, bang, bang. Hiss, puff, SSS, swords and sabers clashed. Blood was sacrificed to the heavens. When enemies met on a narrow path, there was no other way. Only the brave would win. The battlefield was a strange place. There was no reason to speak of. When two people who had never met, they immediately killed each other for no reason. That's right, there was only killing, no mercy. If you were merciful, the next one to fall would be you. Tang In was the first to finish off his opponent. This time, it had nothing to do with whether he was strong or not. At that time, Tang In pretended to chop and then threw his saber out. The enemy soldier had a stunned expression and was directly beheaded. He definitely died with his eyes open. Damn, how could you throw out your weapon at the beginning of the battle? You're not a javelin soldier. By the time Tang and managed to grab the shield and put it over his head to quickly retreat, many of the people around him had also succeeded. Most of the people who were shackled were veterans. Now that they had returned to the battlefield, their skills were not rusty at all. As for the members of the Gray Space, they were all trained by Tang En. After experiencing continuous pursuit, they were ruthless. Go, go, go. After the first round of attacks, Fry roared anxiously and brought a few people to guard the rear. They had no choice but to leave. Although they managed to hold on here, it was almost a one-sided massacre in other places. If they did not retreat, they would soon be surrounded and annihilated. At this time, the shortcomings of Fry and the others could be seen. Although their fighting skills were not inferior to their opponents, they were even better. However, the shackles on their feet seriously affected their movement speed. Someone grabbed the shield, but because of the difference of one step, he could not withdraw. "Captain, don't worry about us. Let's go." One of the people who was surrounded roared, and then pounced on the crowd in front of him. Although he knocked down one of them, his figure was instantly drowned by the snow-white sword light. "Let's go, Captain! Let's go!" In just a moment, the people who were surrounded all chose a suicidal charge. They knew that if they did not do this, Captain Fry would definitely not retreat. F***CK. Frey's eyes instantly turned red. Those were his brothers who had been with him for many years. Now that they had died here, how could he not be heartbroken? "We can't, Fry. We can't hold on anymore. If we don't leave now, we won't be able to." Titan was also one of the people who brought up the rear. Because he had lost an arm yesterday, it was inconvenient for him to swing his sword. He was already injured in many places. "Oh, let's go." Fry had long been used to death. Previously, he had lost his mind in grief because of the deep feelings he had with those people. Now that he was awakened by the roar, he immediately waved his spear and forced half the soldiers to retreat. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 194. Although Fry had shouted the order to retreat, it was not easy to retreat now. Although they managed to grab the shields in the previous round, they also attracted the attention of the enemy soldiers. At this time, they were chasing after them, and this was just one of the difficulties. The most troublesome thing was that there were countless miners behind them at this time. The approach of the soldiers previously blocked everyone here, and now they became obstacles for Tang En's retreat. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" Although they shouted loudly, in this case, everyone cherished their lives, and no one was willing to face the soldiers directly. Some people even deliberately squeezed them out, wanting them to face the soldiers. The people behind attack and clear a path. The corner of Frey's eyes twitched, and he shouted decisively with a dark face. "This!" David and the others hesitated. Although they had killed quite a few people, they were all enemies. Now that they wanted to kill these miners, they were inevitably hesitant. But the people with shackles on their feet heard Frey's order and began to clear the crowd in front of them without hesitation. "Didn't you hear me?" Tang instantly rushed forward and dragged a soldier back. Then he waved his dagger and stabbed him twice in the thigh, and then pushed a group of soldiers out. He turned his head and said indifferently, "Attack." "Oh, yes." The members of the Gray Space heard Tang En's order and stepped forward to drive the crowd away with their swords. Of course, they still didn't attack ruthlessly. Instead, they chose to scare them or knock them away. It turned out that there was space inside. After the people with shackles on their feet killed a few miners, the crowd immediately dispersed to make a path. But this was still not enough space for everyone to retreat. Suddenly, amidst the exclamation, a black shadow was knocked forward from behind and instantly fell into the soldiers' encirclement. It was David. At this time, he looked a little confused. Just now, when he stepped forward to scare a person with shackles on his feet, that person immediately moved aside. But when he walked past, he was directly knocked back by that person. Why? David didn't seem to see the sword slashing at him. and his eyes were fixed on that person. Why? I didn't hurt you. You just need to move aside. Why do you have to do this? That person seemed to understand the question in David's eyes. He curled his lips in disdain and revealed a disdainful sneer. Ding, ding, ding. Suddenly a figure appeared and swung his dagger to parry the flashing saber light around him. Then, without even looking, he kicked David to the back. Chaotic flower. The blood-red glow expanded and formed the shape of a nut. Then, without waiting for the flower of blood to shatter, it exploded and pushed the soldiers in front of him back. Needless to say, this was Tang. However, after using this move, his body could not help but sway. "Brother Arthur, what's wrong?" Fry brandished his gun. "I'm fine." Tang frowned slightly and calmed himself down. Skills were not easy to use. In just a short moment, his previous external injuries had ruptured. "Yes." Fry nodded, then quickly looked around. "Something's not right. We can't take a detour anymore. Let's kill our way back to the gate from the middle." "Okay, you have the final say." Tang took a deep breath and finally dispelled the dark clouds in front of him. "Everyone, listen my orders. Target the gate. Quick, quick." Fry brandished his spear and a green light burst out, pushing back the soldiers who were rushing over. In fact, they were now in the middle of the crowd. Logically speaking, the soldiers should not dare to chase after them. However, when the others saw the soldiers chasing after them, they all retreated. Even if they were close at hand, they did not dare to brandish their sabers. Therefore, the soldiers still rushed over unscrupulously. Why? David, who was flying back, brandished his saber and chased after the person who pushed him out. Bang! Sparks flew. The person with shackles on his feet had some skills. He immediately brandished his saber to parry. Why? David pressed on, and Thunder brandished his saber again. Bang! Another parry. That person did not have the time to reply. David's brute force had already cracked his palm, and the saber was about to fall out of his hand. Why? Amidst the angry roar, the saber covered in yellow light chopped down. Bang! That person held half of the saber hilt and stood there in a daze. Then a line of blood flowed from his forehead to his chin and then to his chest. Rip! He was split into two halves and fell to the ground. Crazy massacres were happening everywhere. Not everyone had the courage to fight when faced with a difficult situation. In fact, more people were running around like headless flies. Some directly bumped into the soldiers' sabers, and some rushed to the back and pushed the people in front of them to block the sabers. Under such circumstances, the attacking soldiers quickly advanced to less than 100 meters away from the gate. At this moment, whoosh, 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 a shadow instantly shrouded them, and a large number of spinning arrows fell from the sky with the whistling of death. F***CK. Gather, raise the shields. Fry roared. Everyone immediately gathered together and raised the shields they had just snatched, forming a barrier. Bang, bang, bang. When the powerful arrow landed on the shield, it immediately turned into sawdust and flew out. Of course, more arrows penetrated the bodies of people. Among them, some attacked the soldiers, some attacked the miners. More of them attacked the miners because they had no shelter. Damn, I knew they would do this. Fry looked at the arrows that were constantly shooting above the wooden gate. The goal of the mine soldiers was not to use the miners as a barricade. Their ultimate goal was to use the miners as a hindrance to buy enough time and distance for the archers to attack. This was undoubtedly cruel, but in order to win, it was also the most effective way. Quick, quick! Keep pushing. Although this round of arrow rain brought death to Tang and the others, it also hindered the soldiers behind them from continuing to pursue. Everyone held up their shields and continued to attack the wooden gate. The mine soldiers' shooting was not without direction. They were mainly aiming at the place behind the miners. After all, if they shot everyone to death, who would create an obstacle for them? Their advance was not smooth. When the miners who had no shelter saw Tang and the others' shields, they immediately surrounded them. At first, they begged, then they snatched. In fact, Tang and the others were not the only ones who had shields. The soldiers who chased them and also had shields. However, these people did not choose to rob the soldiers. Not a single one. This caused a lot of trouble for Tang, In, and the others. Some people were already exposed to the arrows because of the chaos. F*CK, attack, attack. Fry roared with his eyes wide open. The shield were not only a tool they used to protect their lives, but also their hope to escape. Naturally, they could not let others take them away. At this time, everyone no longer had any psychological burden. They waved their weapons and slashed in all directions. They killed a bloody path through the crowd and went straight to the gate. At this moment, a voice sounded from behind them. Arthur, save me. David, save me. If you like this work, you are welcome to come come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.